if some of the public called, and they're right, that there's a law that the president, that the federal government can't do anything without local or state request, would you request martial law?
I've already called for martial law in the city of New Orleans. We did that a few days ago.
Did the governor do that too?
I don't know. I don't think so. But we called for martial law when we realized that the looting was getting out of control, and we redirected all of our police officers back to patrolling the streets. They were dead tired from saving people, but they worked all night because we thought this thing was going to blow wide open last night. And so we redirected all of our resources, and we held it under check. I'm not sure if we can do that another night with the current resources. And I am telling you right now, they're showing all these reports of people looting and doing all that weird stuff, and they are doing that. But people are desperate, and they're trying to find food and water, the majority of them. Now, you got some knuckleheads out there, and they are taking advantage of this this situation where, we can't really control it, and they are doing some awful, awful things. But that's a small majority of the people. Most people are looking to try and survive. And you've got, one of the things people have, nobody's talked about this. Drugs flowed in and out of New Orleans and the surrounding metropolitan area so freely it was scary to me. And that's why we were having an escalation in murders. People don't want to talk about this, but I'm going to talk about it. You had drug addicts that are now walking around this city looking for a fix. And that's the reason why they were breaking in hospitals and drugstores. They're looking for something to take the edge off of their Jones, if you will. And right now, they don't have anything to take the edge off. And they've probably found guns. So what you're seeing is drug-starving, crazy addicts, drug addicts, that are wreaking havoc. And we don't have the manpower to adequately deal with it. We can only target certain sections of the city and form a perimeter around them and hope to God that we're not overrun.
Context of White Supremacy. Gusty Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Friday, September 18th, 2015. So I have been told. The audio segment at the beginning of the broadcast, that was former Mayor Ray Nagin, his infamous call-in to WWL, Robin Garlinet, his broadcast, that was during the first week, I think just 3 days after Hurricane Katrina hit and after the levee failure. I think most people heard the earlier portion of his call-in where former Mayor Nagin, where he was, talking about how the federal government had not responded, and President Bush and everybody else, they didn't have any help. It was too many press conferences, and it was too doggone late. People were dying, which was absolutely true. But that portion about drug addicts jonesing for a fix, and that was why they were breaking into everything, I don't think as many people got to hear that. I think that is also significant in terms of a way that we think about people who were dying, drowning, and just looking to get a little water, a little food, a little help, that they are classified as crackheads, basically. Anyway, this is our third book study session on Mr. Gary Rivlin, his book, Katrina, After the Flood. We are kind of at the end of Chapter 4, going right into Chapter 5. I hope folks are getting constructive information, learning a lot. We will have a Louis Farrakhan drop today, and we will have explicit commentary on whether or not the levees were bombed during this week's section. Without further ado, we will get right to it. Context of White Supremacy, Katrina, After the Flood, audio segment number 1. The bank still hadn't heard from a large portion of its employees. In the silence, it was hard not to think the worst. 1 week after the flooding, the mayor speculated on the Today Show that about 10,000 of his fellow citizens had likely perished, and Liberty's people generally lived in the city's hardest hit areas. Finding the employees wasn't easy. People's home phones didn't work, and of course work extensions were worthless. The bank had some cell phone numbers, but that usually meant listening to the rapid busy signal everyone in the 504 area code was hearing. Weeks passed before anyone heard from Pete, an appraiser for the bank. He had been rescued from his roof in New Orleans East. Others had endured the hell of the convention center or the Superdome. A month passed before McDonald was able to say with certainty that no Liberty employee had perished in the storm. Cell phones started working more reliably 9 or 10 days after the storm. That made communication easier, and as people's phones chirped to life, a corresponding burst of hope occurred among the city's business leaders. That only brought into greater relief the disparity between McDonald's life and that of most of his corporate peers. On Thursday nights in Baton Rouge, the well-connected gathered at Gino's, an Italian restaurant with a large bar area popular with legislators, lobbyists, and other local power brokers. Over copious glasses of wine on the second Thursday after Katrina, the mood was almost triumphant as good news finally started to arrive via newly revived phones. The French Quarter was dry. So too was the core of the central business district and uptown, or at least the uptown of Old New Orleans. Things have really started to turn for the better in the past 48 hours, said Stephen Perry, a Gino's regular and CEO of the New Orleans Convention and Visitors Bureau. Perry, who had served as chief of staff to Blanco's predecessor, was hearing that power would be restored to the core city within 3 weeks. The water and sewer systems should be functioning in key parts of New Orleans by then as well. Perry predicted the quarter could be ready to greet visitors in less than 90 days. In a town where tourism was the #1 industry, the areas that visitors would care most about, including the warehouse and garden districts, were the least affected by the flooding. That, Perry said, would provide the city a base on which to build. Uptown hadn't escaped unscathed. Fallen trees and downed utility poles were everywhere. Falling limbs had destroyed much of the catenary that powered the streetcars that run up and down St. Charles. Many uptown homes suffered roof damage. Yet optimism coursed through this well-heeled, mostly white crowd. A well-connected corporate attorney talked about the possibility of holding Mardi Gras that February as usual. An executive with a major oil company saw no reason his co-workers couldn't be back at their desks inside a few weeks. He had been on the phone with his employees all day. Not a single person he spoke with owned a home that had taken on water. In many ways, the men and women gathered at Gino's that night were McDonald's peers. He served on the same boards and commissions and knew them from meetings of the Chamber of Commerce, where McDonald was the presiding officer. Like McDonald, most seemed to be doubling up in satellite offices or working at borrowed desks. Alden is one of the city's 5 or 10 most prominent movers and shakers, said Patrick Quinn, a prominent developer and hoteler in town who, along with his wife, a state senator representing the western and northern suburbs, had taken up temporary residence in Baton Rouge. Perhaps it went without saying that few, if any, other blacks were on Quinn's list. The contrast was not lost on McDonald. In much of the western half of town, where the majority of whites lived, Katrina was proving a severe inconvenience more than a tragedy. Most of the white business people at Gino's that night were frustrated that they couldn't get home, but they knew they would have a home and belongings and a job to which to return. McDonald, however, lived in the black half of town where everyone he knew was staring into the abyss. Their homes and businesses were in ruins. You're looking at the television and seeing water up to the street signs, said Arthur Johnson, an administrator in the New Orleans school district at the time of Katrina, who lived not far from McDonald. And we're all thinking, we'll never go back. There's no reason to go back. Everything is gone. Russell Labb and Joe James were hailed as heroes for their water journey into New Orleans to retrieve the software and equipment Liberty so desperately needed. But another week of phone calls followed with the emergency backup company, who always told McDonald and his people that the problem was on their end. In the months to come, no topic, not his interminable fights with insurance firms or utility companies, or even a final bill on all the money the looters stole, irritated McDonald quite like his disappointments with a backup company that had him running the bank blind for nearly 2 weeks. Not until 4 p.m. on Friday, September 9th, 2005, 11 days after the flood, was Liberty back on the interbank network. Initially, McDonald had put a $100 daily limit on all ATM withdrawals. But imagining his customers in hotels around the country racking up expenses, he upped the daily maximum to $500 and hoped his customers had the money to cover the cash they were withdrawing. In a catastrophe, he was intent on playing Jimmy Carter's George Bailey and not Lionel Barrymore's Mr. Potter. A banker is someone who gives you an umbrella when the sun is shining and takes it away when it starts to rain, McDonald said, repeating an unflattering adage about his profession. But, he added, we try not to be that banker. The decision cost Liberty close to $1 million. That was nothing compared to the bank's other losses. A no questions asked 4-month grace period on any home, business, or auto loan in a flooded area might have been the right thing to do, but it also represented millions of dollars in checks the bank wouldn't be cashing in the months to come. And even once January 1st came, then what? Could he expect most people to resume payments on properties and cars and businesses that had been wrecked in a once-in-a-lifetime flood? Pre-Katrina, Liberty generated $150,000 in loan fees and another $70,000 in charges from checking accounts every month. But the bank wasn't originating many loans in the months after Katrina, and Liberty had suspended checking fees for most of its customers. The $100,000 a month the bank generated leasing out space in its headquarters also disappeared. Liberty had frozen interest charges on credit card balances, representing more lost revenues, and there would be no late fees for 4 months. In the long run, it would be good for Liberty's business that people carried larger balances on their credit cards, but first, the bank needed to survive the short run. Every week I took, McDonald said, 6 weeks after the storm, I'm losing money. Layoffs were inevitable. I'm going to have to give severance packages and try to help people to get to where they're going to get, he told a reporter around an hour after Liberty was back on the global financial grid. I need to balance income and expense. 11 days after Katrina, he offered a few half-hearted words of optimism and then confessed, I'm running against time. He knew the regulators were watching him closely. State examiners in Baton Rouge were coming by his temporary offices, and another set were checking in from Dallas, where the FDIC has its regional office. They understand we're losing a certain amount of money now, McDonald said, but regulators are not going to let us lose too much before they step in. 6 of his 8 branches in New Orleans had flooded. Several had been battered by looters, including one of the 2 that hadn't taken on any water. The ground floor of his new headquarters was a complete loss, and what was happening with the rest of the building remained a mystery. If nothing else, he would need to replace every window. He had insurance on the building, but what his policy would cover and what it wouldn't was another unknown. The Whitney, where the city's blue bloods banked, was off the ATM network in the days after Katrina. So too were other local banks. Regulators were worried about the whole system in New Orleans collapsing, McDonald said. But I think it's fair to say they were more worried about me than anyone else. It would have been an overstatement to say that as went this one bank, so would go New Orleans. But it didn't seem too much of a stretch to claim that Liberty's success and the future of the city's black neighborhoods were intertwined. McDonald would need a healthy black middle class if he hoped to revive the bank. In turn, the black middle class would need a bank like Liberty to help it thrive again. At the moment, it looked as if the French Quarter, the Garden District, and other parts of New Orleans precious to locals and visitors alike would survive. The prognosis for New Orleans East and Gentilly, however, and the smaller black or Creole neighborhoods such as the 7th Ward, St. Roch, and the Lower 9th Ward was far from clear. Dennis Hastert, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, was openly suggesting that at least some of these neighborhoods didn't have a future. It looks like a lot of that place could be bulldozed, said Hastert, a Republican from Illinois, 2 days after Katrina. Through his own contacts in Washington, McDonald knew Hastert was speaking on behalf of many inside the Beltway. A great deal of recovery money would be set aside for New Orleans, McDonald's Washington contacts assured him, but it would be nowhere close to the multiple tens of billions the city needed to rebuild after the most expensive disaster in U.S. history. After 33 years spent building Liberty into one of the country's biggest black-owned banks, McDonald was asking himself whether he would outlast the bank examiners to celebrate a 34th. Chapter 5. The Shadow Government. Mayor Nagin woke up early on Saturday morning. It was barely sunrise on the 6th day presiding over a waterlogged city, and finally he had gotten 4 or 5 hours of sleep. Clots of people were still at the Superdome, but he was pleased to learn the buses had been running all night. Convoys of buses were finally starting to clear out the convention center, which would be empty of people by Sunday night. Sunday was the day Nagin started talking to the media. First up was Oprah Winfrey, who was due in the city at noon. The early part of the Winfrey interview proved disastrous. At first, the problem was Eddie Compass, the police chief, who, Nagin said, verbally exploded in front of the cameras. Compass himself had told the Guardian newspaper that his people had yet to substantiate any rapes at either the Superdome or the convention center. The article appeared the night before the Winfrey interview. There was also no evidence of the violent crimes that had supposedly been committed in either refuge. Yet Compass, who kept butting into Nagin's conversation with Winfrey, blurted out, "We've got babies being raped." The mayor asked for a small break and pulled his chief aside. "Pull yourself together," he hissed. Yet Nagin proved no less reckless a spokesman for his city. "People in that frickin' Superdome for 5 days," Nagin told Winfrey, "watching dead bodies, watching hooligans killing people, raping people." For days there had been apocryphal talk of slit throats and even rape of a 7-year-old girl inside the Superdome. Now New Orleans mayor and its police chief were repeating unsubstantiated accounts of unspeakable crimes to the afternoon audience watching the Oprah Winfrey show. Winfrey was dressed in jeans, a lime green blouse, and rain boots. Nagin asked if she'd like to go inside the Superdome, but immediately regretted the invitation. Too late to say no, he made Winfrey look at the camera and repeat after him, "I, Oprah Winfrey, promise not to hold the city liable financially or otherwise as a result of me going into this doggone stinky-ass Superdome. All week, Nagin had avoided talking to people inside the dome out of fear for his own safety. But now, with Winfrey walking into the empty facility, he was assaulted by a smell so malodorous, he said, "I could taste funk." Tears filled Winfrey's eyes as she scanned the dank building lit up by shafts of light from the big holes that Katrina had punched in the dome's roof. How could the richest country in the world let Americans suffer the way they did over the past week? Nagin asked. The two hugged when they said their goodbyes. Nagin sat down with John Donovan of Nightline after Winfrey. Immediately, Sally Foreman knew she had made a mistake pushing the mayor into the spotlight when he was describing himself as mentally and physically drained. Donovan opened with a softball question about Nagin's house. The mayor's home had not flooded and only suffered minor roof damage, yet she watched as the mayor told Donovan, "I know it's gone. I don't want to see it." The mayor seemed surprised when Donovan asked if race was the reason it took so many days to come to the city's rescue. "Call it race or call it class," the mayor said, "but I don't think this type of response would have happened if this was Orange County, California." The mayor ended his Sunday with Scott Pelley of 60 Minutes, where his exhaustion expressed itself as pessimism. When you see a city that you love so much and you see it devastated and almost dead, you wonder what the future looks like. Nagin was up early the next morning talking with Matt Lauer, who spoke with him via satellite for the Today Show studio in New York. The mayor gave Stone Phillips of Dateline a flyover tour of the city, then opened up to CNN's Soledad O'Brien. "What the state was doing, I don't frickin' know," Nagin told O'Brien, "but I tell you, I'm pissed. It wasn't adequate." Off camera, Foreman was frantically slashing her finger across her throat, but the mayor ignored her. She said she needed 24 hours. The mayor continued, referring to the governor's confrontation with the president on Air Force One. And more people died. When Diane Sawyer asked Nagin about Bush, the mayor gave the commander-in-chief the benefit of the doubt. "I don't think the right information got to the president." Sally Foreman was with Nagin when she received the expected phone call from the governor early Tuesday morning. The mayor and his communications director were on Canal Street. Post-storm, the media had parked satellite trucks, RVs, generators, and tents where normally streetcars would be running. Nagin and Foreman were sitting under the big top NBC had set up, waiting for the mayor to talk live with Katie Couric. Nagin nodded an emphatic no when Foreman mouthed that the governor was on the line. So Foreman absorbed Blanco's fury at being accused of making a decision that cost lives. "If the mayor wants to go toe-to-toe, I'll go toe-to-toe with him," Blanco warned. The governor's voice was cracking, Foreman said, and she thought Blanco might be crying. Blanco said she wasn't. Foreman mimed tears and gave her boss a pleading look. He wouldn't take the phone. The conversation ended when the connection was lost, causing Foreman to utter an audible, "Thank you, Jesus." "Man, I gotta get out of Dodge." Ray Nagin made it no secret how badly he needed a break that second week after Katrina. Thousands of guardsmen were now patrolling New Orleans along with another 2,200 soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division. The city was safe, and he wanted to see his wife and kids who had flown to Dallas the day before the storm. In the command center that the city and Entergy were still operating on the 4th floor of the Hyatt, he asked Dan Packer, Entergy's CEO, for a ride to Dallas on Entergy's corporate jet. On Thursday, September 8th, 10 days after the city flooded, Nagin flew to Dallas, forcing Packer to make the trip as well, given a company policy that an Entergy officer be aboard. I was very much in need of rest and recuperation, Nagin wrote of his decision to leave New Orleans for 5 days after Katrina. The mayor's time in Dallas was uneventful. His 2 boys, Jeremy, 21, and Jaron, 18, were there, as was his daughter, Tiana, who was 6. The mayor caught up on sleep, but otherwise they spent their days like other well-off New Orleanians needing to relocate, at least temporarily. The Nagins went to the mall to buy the mayor some new clothes. They visited potential schools for Tiana and found a townhouse that would serve as their temporary home base. Nagin told his wife that the family should figure on staying there for at least the next 6 months. The mayor did have city business in Dallas. Just before leaving New Orleans, Jimmy Reese had phoned. Reese was an important ally and Nagin's RTA chief, but he was also the one who told the Wall Street Journal that New Orleans would become demographically different after the storm, or he and the other old line families wouldn't be moving back. Now Reese was insisting that Nagin make time to meet with him and other members of the business council. The mayor's being out of town made everything simpler. Dallas had an operating airport and hotels with working toilets. That Saturday, the mayor drove himself to the giant Lowe's Anatel Hotel just north of downtown Dallas, for what he later described as my meeting with the shadow government of New Orleans. Ray Nagin was 9 years old in 1965 when Hurricane Betsy battered New Orleans. His family stayed in New Orleans through Betsy, he wrote, because we just couldn't afford to leave the city for an unplanned vacation. Levee failures after Betsy caused mass flooding in the lower Ninth and other parts of the city, but not in the 7th Ward where the Nagins lived. Nagin's father worked as a bricklayer and a truck mechanic. Eventually, he secured a job as a garment cutter and earned extra money moonlighting as a city hall janitor. The mayor described his mother as a homemaker who did seamstress work to supplement the family's income. The future mayor would be born at the city's charity hospital in 1956. His parents named their only son Clarence, but only Nagin's wife, Salitha, seemed to call him that. Officially, he was C. Ray Nagin, but to most everyone, he was Ray. The 7th Ward was a community of cottages and shotgun houses filled with the city's barbers, waiters, and factory workers. The Nagins were a religious family, Catholic, and Nagin was an altar boy at the church a block from their house. That's also where Nagin attended elementary school. He earned good grades without having to work too hard. Mainly, he focused on athletics. His curveball won him a baseball scholarship at Tuskegee University, where Nagin earned a degree in accounting. After graduation, he bounced around in various jobs that sent him first to Los Angeles and then to Dallas. In 1985, at age 29, he landed a good-paying job that brought him back to New Orleans as a controller for Cox Communications, the cable company. Nagin flourished at Cox. Its books were in horrible shape when he arrived, Nagin said. Somehow the franchise was losing money despite having a monopoly and 90,000 customers. Nagin was steadily promoted and was soon a Cox vice president, overseeing its New Orleans operations. While at Cox, Nagin launched a live call-in show on the Community Access Channel and served as co-host of this once-a-month program that gave unhappy Cox customers a forum to complain. There he learned the skill of talking to the general public via a television screen, or, as he put it, honed my skills on romancing the camera. Bill Hines, a prominent attorney in town, recalled the night that Nagin announced he was running for mayor. A year earlier, Hines, who is white, helped to inaugurate the participants tended to call the Black-White Dinner. 10 black business leaders and 10 white had a standing invitation to a monthly dinner that was ostensibly about improving race relations in New Orleans. At one of their regular dinners in the fall of 2001, Hines said, "Ray Nagin clinks his glass and says, 'I have something to tell everybody.' We ask, 'What's that?' He says, 'I'm going to run for mayor.' We all started laughing. If Nagin harbored any political ambition, he had done a good job of concealing it. Even his wife confessed bafflement over her 45-year-old husband's sudden interest in local politics. My initial reaction," Salitha Nagin wrote in an email exchange with Sally Foreman, "was that of shock." Nagin made it official in December 2001 on the final day of candidate registration. 2 months before Election Day, he was joining an already crowded field of 14, nearly all of them black. Polls showed him drawing less than 3% of the vote. He fashioned himself as a crusading outsider, vowing to take the "for sale" sign off City Hall. But others were also claiming the reformer's mantle. Had Ray Nagin started this 8 months ago, it would have been very interesting, said Stan Pampy Bear, a local businessman and political fixer. "I gave him money, but I just don't see this happening." Founded in 1718, New Orleans is one of the older U.S. metropolises. In the early 19th century, it was the country's third most populous city. Its ports opened the city to a cosmopolitan assortment of characters, but it also made New Orleans the center of the slave trade. The city was home to the largest slave market in North America. At the same time, more free black people walked its streets than anywhere else in the Deep South. The country's largest slave revolt took place just north of New Orleans in 1811. A former French colony, New Orleans lived by the infamous Code Noir, which spelled out the rules for slave ownership. If a slave struck his or her owner, or anyone else in his master's family, the law dictated that the slave be executed. An escapee should have his or her ears cut off and their hamstrings severed if gone for 2 months. But slaves in New Orleans also had the right to earn money, and during Spanish rule, they secured the right to buy their freedom. Both French and Spanish law recognized that freed slaves, free people of color they were called, and those who had never been enslaved had the same rights as any other colonial subject. In time, many free people of color settled the Faubourg Treme, or simply Treme, just across Rampart Street from the French Quarter. Treme has been described as the oldest black neighborhood in America. Its cultural center was Congo Square, which some music historians point to as the birthplace of jazz. The country's first black-owned daily newspaper was founded near the end of the Civil War, the New Orleans Tribune. This paper, begun as a bilingual broadsheet, had a mixed-race staff that sought to help shape the new post-Civil War South. The Tribune called on government to divide the southern plantations and grant plots to former slaves, and advocated equality under the law. Closer to home, the paper also demanded the integration of the city's streetcars, which occurred in 1867. That was during Reconstruction, when the federal government exerted its might to guarantee that newly enfranchised blacks could vote. 1/5 of the city's schools were integrated. Louisiana could even boast of the country's first black governor. The country's next would not be elected until 1990. The federal government withdrew its troops from the South in 1877, 12 years after the Civil War ended. The schools in New Orleans resegregated. Congo Square was renamed Beauregard Square in honor of a Confederate general who had lived in New Orleans. A statue of Confederate hero Robert E. Lee was erected near the bottom of St. Charles Avenue, and in 1884, Tivoli Circle was renamed Lee Circle. Taking direct aim at New Orleans, the state legislature in 1890 passed a separate car act which reinstated segregation on public transportation. The black population fought back. In 1892, half a century before the 1955 arrest of Rosa Parks helped to spark the modern civil rights movement, a black man from New Orleans named Homer Plessy took a seat in a train carriage reserved for whites. The resulting legal case made it to the U.S. Supreme Court, which in 1896 used Plessy v. Ferguson to establish the doctrine of separate but equal. Plessy remained the law for 6 decades until it was overturned in 1954 by Brown v. Board of Education. Plessy was a cruel blow to all African Americans, but the loss was more deeply felt in New Orleans, where the dream of equality had seemed closer at hand. Following Plessy, Louisiana purged 95% of the state's blacks from its voter rolls, and the city stopped offering schooling past the 5th grade to black children. The Klan took hold in the area, and lynchings in the city became more commonplace. The integration of the schools, more accurately their reintegration, proved the bitterest, most hard-fought battle. In 1956, 2 years after Brown v. Board of Education, and the year Ray Nagin was born, a federal judge ordered the Orleans Parish School Board to adopt a blueprint for desegregating its schools. 4 years later, the Orleans Parish School Board finally unveiled its plan, limited to a single grade in 2 of the city's 100-plus schools. The governor, an avowed segregationist named Jimmy Davis, called an emergency legislative session to forestall the implementation. The state even tried to have November 14th, the date the board's plan was to take effect, declared a school holiday. The names of the affected schools were kept secret until the morning of the 14th, but that just added to the spectacle. 4 black girls were chosen to enter the 1st grade in a pair of whites-only schools in a working-class section of New Orleans. Could anyone be surprised that the board was choosing to integrate first in the neighborhoods where the city's laborers and factory workers lived? As news spread, white parents descended on the schools. By the day's end, every white child but one had been removed from the 2 schools. That white girl, Pam Foreman, whose father was a minister, would complete the year at her assigned school, but in a classroom by herself. Don't wait for your daughter to be raped by these Congolese, Judge Leander Perez, an organizer of the Citizens Council of the Greater New Orleans, a local white supremacist group, said at a rally held the day after the schools were integrated. Don't wait until the burrheads are forced into your schools. Do something about it now. The Times-Picayune declared integration a tragedy, and the school board president left it no secret what he believed. As an elected official, I feel it is my duty to provide public education, if possible on a segregated basis, but if not, on an integrated basis. He was only following the law, but people shunned him and his business. In race relations and in other ways, New Orleans has always been a city apart from the rest of America. This port city that served as a gateway to the rest of the Americas has always had a strong Caribbean flavor. Creole culture defines New Orleans. Its food, its music, its dance, and its African traditions date to even before the Revolutionary War. Over the centuries, control of the city shifted from the French to the Spanish to the Anglo-Americans, and all of them left their imprint on the city's culture. The city was famous for an annual Mardi Gras celebration which stretched for weeks and featured seemingly endless parades. Black, white, who cared in this laid-back, good-time city where the phrase "Laissez le bon temps rouler," let the good times roll, is seen and heard so often it might as well be the city's motto. Yet the white community's reaction to school desegregation showed that attitudes toward race in New Orleans were no different from in any other American cities. 70,000 whites fled the city in the first 10 years after school integration. Another 90,000 moved out during the 1970s. Those who could afford it found a place in Jefferson Parish, west or south of the city, or they bought a home on the other side of Lake Pontchartrain in St. Tammany Parish. Those of more modest means chose to start over in St. Bernard Parish, just south and east of New Orleans, where a major thoroughfare was named in honor of the judge warning about burrheads in the schools. At the same time, tens of thousands of blacks moved into the city. In 1960, New Orleans had a population of just over 600,000 people, nearly two-thirds of whom, 63%, were white. By the time Katrina hit in 2005, the city's population had shrunk to under 500,000, and a full two-thirds, 67% of its people, were black. The suburban parishes saw a corresponding explosion as the population of the metro area remained steady. White flight reshaped the New Orleans metropolitan area as profoundly as any in the United States. In 1962, white business leaders in New Orleans pressured the eateries on Canal Street to desegregate, a kind of preemptive strike against the sit-ins just starting to take place in the city. In 1963, the city's white mayor removed the white and colored signs from the restrooms in all city-owned buildings. In 1970, the city elected Moon Landrieu, a white liberal, as mayor. Landrieu, who had been the only legislator to oppose the state's attempts to thwart the integration of the Orleans Parish Public Schools, captured 90% of the black vote in a city then equally divided between black and white. Landrieu appointed a black man to serve as his number two and filled a vacancy on the city council with an outspoken pastor who had called for a boycott of any store that didn't hire black clerks. Landrieu's 8 years in office won him the enduring love of the city's black community and turned the Landrieu name into a curse word inside more conservative circles. Ernest Dutch Morale followed Landrieu into office. Morale's life was a series of firsts. First African American to receive a law degree from LSU, first African American since Reconstruction to be elected to the Louisiana legislature, the state's first black juvenile court judge, and the first elected to an appellate court judgeship. In 1978, Morale became the city's first black mayor by capturing 95% of the black vote and 20% support among whites. An astonishing 76% of the black electorate turned out to vote, as did 75% of the parish's registered whites. 4 years later, Morale easily won re-election against a white challenger, though he received only 13% of the white vote the second time. A majority of the city's workforce was black by the end of Morale's second and final term. Mayors in New Orleans are limited to 2 terms in office. Black-owned businesses accounted for $17,000 in contracts at the start of Morale's tenure, but $11 million by the time he left office in 1986. That figure was paltry, but worrisome to all those construction barons and bond underwriters and lawyers who had for years feasted on City Hall contracts. White New Orleans wasn't without influence. Much of the city's white populace had disappeared to the suburbs, but not its gentry, those upper-class burghers who traced their New Orleans bloodlines back at least to the 19th century and awaited their turn as king of Mardi Gras. They lived on St. Charles and the side streets around Audubon Park in the same sturdy 2-story manses as their ancestors. They still ate and drank at the same private clubs. "I'll give people uptown credit," said Paul Ballou, the programming director for WBKO, a black-oriented talk radio station. Just a few blocks from these nice stately homes, you've got all these little shotgun singles and doubles. There's a lot of people of modest means in those small houses, black people, but the old money white people stayed. A shotgun home is one without hallways where one room leads to another. It helped that those with enough money could send their children to private school, thereby sidestepping the integration issue. Uptown still retained its economic clout despite the shift in majority from white to black. Its people were still the city's CEOs, top lawyers, bankers, and real estate developers. whites controlled the business community and dominated philanthropic circles. One member of their club, Ashton Phelps Jr., owned the Times-Picayune, the fourth generation of his family to run the paper. They had deep reservoirs of cash and other means of political influence. If they couldn't elect one of their own, they'd elect someone willing to do their bidding. After Morial, the white elite backed Sidney Bartholomew for mayor. Bartholomew was a black member of the city council, more moderate in both his politics and demeanor. Bartholomew was elected with 88% of the white vote and only 25% of the black vote, but disappointed his white backers by supporting the affirmative action policies of his predecessors. 2 terms of Bartholomew were followed by his predecessor's eldest son, Mark Morial, who won only 7% of the white vote in his first run for mayor. Mark Morial, too, would serve for 8 years, leaving the city in 2002 with no incumbent in the race and also no favorite for mayor. Despite his inexperience, Nagin proved an appealing candidate. He had been born at the city's public hospital and was a graduate of its public schools. He lacked experience. Like most citizens, Nagin would say when it was revealed during the campaign that he had only sporadically bothered to vote. I was basically making the best of my time while consciously ignoring the declining state of my city. But his outsider status proved an asset in a city more than a little fed up with the drumbeat of news stories about politicians in the pockets of wealthy contributors. "We don't tolerate corruption in Louisiana," the homegrown James Carville once quipped. "We demand it." Nagin was a good-looking candidate whose plain-spoken manner had its own charm. "Man, I think we need to sell that sucker." That's how he described his idea during one debate for putting the city's airport on the auction block to pay to fix the city's crumbling infrastructure. Nagin had a few big names in his corner, including Ashton Phelps of the Times-Picayune and Jimmy Reese. Yet barely a month before the election, he was already out of money and polling at an anemic 5%. Ray was basically running his own campaign at that point, said his friend David White, a local black businessman who served as campaign treasurer. There was a group of us who made all the strategic decisions, but there wasn't what you'd call a campaign manager. What began as a campaign against waste and fraud broadened into a run against the black establishment. Rather than seeking the endorsements of the existing black political organizations, Nagin openly mocked them. He came out against living wage ordinance and singled his intention to eliminate the city's set-aside program for minority and women-owned businesses. Uptown money poured into his campaign, turning an also ran into an unlikely front-runner. The slick new brochures and radio and TV ads the campaign could now afford cast him as a fresh-faced, reform-minded businessman who would turn around New Orleans. The Times-Picayune endorsed him. "He thinks on his feet," the paper's editorial board wrote. "He is focused and innovative." So, too, with the Gambit, the city's alternative weekly. Nagin proved the top vote-getter in February and then glided to victory in the runoff 1 month later, when an 86% share of the white vote was more than enough to make up for only 40% of the black vote. Chapter 6. Looking the Part. Nagin's first summer as mayor was about spectacle. To show he was serious about snuffing out under-the-table payoffs and other forms of graft, the new mayor had initiated a sting operation. In a single day, arrest warrants were issued for 84 people, the biggest crackdown on municipal corruption in the modern history of the city. The Times-Picayune enthused, and even the national news picked up on the story. Most of those arrested were cab drivers who felt obliged to make payoffs to stay in business. The local district attorney dropped 2/3 of the cases, citing weak evidence. Yet Nagin was the new mayor who even had a cousin among those who had been indicted. His approval ratings soared to 80%. Nagin's self-assuredness and confidence what Jed Horn, then city editor of the Times-Picayune, described as the mayor's loose-limbed affability served him well in his first few years of office. His communications director, Sally Foreman, spoke of the shift she felt when the mayor walked into a room. Her boss, she said, would captivate onlookers with his polished style, muscular build, and trademark shaved head. Once a month, Nagin got into a Rambo-looking black SUV he nicknamed Big Daddy, and the two of them would tape a show on his old cable access channel. He always looked great, Foreman said, dressed in a crisp white shirt, silver cufflinks, and a dark pinstripe suit. Yet governing meant more than looking and sounding apart. Nagin's decision to make a radical break, seeking out top people who had little or no government experience to help him run City Hall, was principled, maybe even admirable. But he was also on his third chief of staff when Katrina hit, and she had been on the job for less than a month. Sally Foreman, who had started as the city's chief of protocol before being promoted to communications director a year into Nagin's tenure, was one of the more seasoned members of his team. Nagin had big ambitions for New Orleans that could be summed up by a story he repeated often when he was still a candidate. He was sitting at the kitchen table talking about the future with his two sons and a few of their friends. They all loved New Orleans, its music and food, and the good time vibe that gave the city its big easy pace and indolent charms, as Newsweek once put it. But all assumed they would need to leave New Orleans to build the career and life they had in mind for themselves. The city had fallen behind other southern cities such as Atlanta and Houston, and even Birmingham and Mobile were perceived as offering more economic opportunities. Reversing this brain drain, the mayor would say, meant doing something about a horrifically high murder rate, the city's failing schools, and other social ills. Someone once said a small band of revolutionaries can change the world, the mayor wrote in an early email to Sally Foreman. Let's change New Orleans for the better. As usual, he signed the email M.N. for Mayor Nagin. Ray Nagin was a man who didn't have allies, offered Oliver Thomas, president of the city council. Thomas was a good-natured political natural who pundits and pollsters said could be the next mayor. A burly 6'6" light-skinned black man with a lumbering gait, Thomas is a soft-spoken giant as likely to throw an arm around a shoulder as shake a hand. We went to school together, man, Thomas said of Nagin. We were friends before he became mayor, but he pushed me away just like he pushed everyone away. Thomas's apparent sin was his association with one of the black political organizations in town. Nagin wanted to show himself above the old ways of narrow partisanship and cliques. After he became mayor, our families never got together anymore, Thomas said. Sally Foreman was always pushing Nagin to act more like a politician. Give him a call, she'd say, about one elected official or another. He only wants to hear from you. So, too, were others around the mayor, including at least one of the chief of staffs whom he had fired. You need friends in the city council, they'd counsel. You need friends in Baton Rouge to get anything done. Nagin had built up considerable political capital, yet didn't know how to use it or simply refused to do so. Let them come to me, he'd tell people. I'm the mayor. People nudged him to do a better job of promoting his ideas, even when it meant sitting down with people he didn't like or respect. He acted as if they were asking him to grovel or act in a way that cheapened the office. Instead, he'd float a proposal in the media and hope the pundits and others saw its inherent wisdom. Nagin felt frustrated by the racial balancing act in being a big city mayor in the modern era. If I do something the white community likes, the blacks get upset, he complained during his weekly Friday lunch with top staffers. And when I do something to help the black community, the whites get upset. This constant tug-of-war between the races, as Nagin described it, had come up as recently as the Friday before Katrina. The primary topic at that lunch was not the impending hurricane, but the upcoming mayor's race in February. With the election less than 6 months away, no big-name opponent had yet to step forward, but Nagin was asking his staff to help him deliver a mandate, not just a victory. Around the table, people floated ideas that would help the mayor win more support among black voters, but others invariably pointed out how that could alienate the mayor's white supporters. Race, politics, and economic development had become a part of every major executive staff decision, Sally Foreman said of that last Friday gathering before the storm, and this day was no different. One exasperating case that had Nagin grumbling was the death of LaVon Jones, a black college student killed on Bourbon Street 9 months earlier. On New Year's Eve 2004, Jones tried to enter a popular Bourbon Street club. In an argument over the way Jones was dressed, 4 bouncers surrounded him and he was strangled to death. After protests by the local NAACP and other civil rights groups, Nagin responded by announcing a secret shopper study. The city would send white and black males of roughly the same body type and dress to Bourbon Street clubs and see if they were treated differently. Despite signaling his intentions, 40% of the street's 28 clubs charged black patrons more for the same drink than white customers. Some also charged blacks a higher cover charge, and a few applied different dress codes depending on the race of the customer. The bar owners should have been ashamed. Instead, they criticized the mayor for putting an unflattering spotlight on Bourbon Street. By the final year of his 4-year term, Nagin's "relax, I've got this in hand" act was starting to grate. On the campaign trail, he'd spoken about building a new city hall and merging departments to save money. But that turned out to be just talk, just like his idea for selling the sucker to contend with a crumbling infrastructure. "Let me percolate on that," Nagin would say, and then weeks, if not months, would pass before the mayor might be ready to make a decision. He was a CEO, Foreman said, who did not like the burden of timelines or deadlines. He had vowed to end minority set-asides, but hadn't, just as he had yet to streamline the permit process or follow through on any number of campaign promises. Nagin could point to accomplishments prior to Katrina. The city's website was good enough to win the notice of other municipalities, and the city was moving forward with a Nagin proposal to install crime cameras around the city. Yet even a straightforward promise to give the city a digital upgrade was proving far more difficult than it had looked from the outside. The bureaucracy couldn't be reasoned with, complained Greg Meffert, the city's technology chief and eventually one of the mayor's closest aides. It didn't care about the merits of an idea. It was this leaderless, half-human, half-machine that kept coming. It was their way or nothing happened. Nagin's RTA chief, Jimmy Reese, was already fed up with Nagin. Reese had helped to create Nagin, opening doors for him among his uptown friends. But the crime rate was worse than it was at the start of Nagin's administration, and the schools were in such a poor condition that the state was moving to take them over. "I didn't care if it was someone black in that office or someone white," Reese said. "We needed results." Katrina only added urgency to the need for action. The Business Council members met with Nagin that Saturday in Dallas at a suite Reese had reserved for them at the Anatole. By Reese's count, 57 members had shown up. Almost everyone in the room was white, but to Reese, that was irrelevant. "I was just looking for concerned citizens willing to give their time and their soul to help the city," he said. While waiting for the mayor, Reese, a slight man with wavy gray hair, offered a sly grin when anyone brought up the Wall Street Journal article, which had been published just 2 days earlier. "Don't regret it one bit," he'd offer, or "it had to be said." The mayor, dressed casually in a pale yellow short-sleeved pullover and dark pants, showed up with Entergy's Dan Packer and several others. Later, Nagin would cast Dallas as the scene of his political liberation. In his telling, he let these people intent on engineering a very different New Orleans talk for a few minutes and then, after drawing a deep breath, let them know he wouldn't be doing their bidding. Look, I'm aware of what some of you have been saying to the national media. He quoted himself as saying in the memoir he wrote after leaving office. But if you're thinking about rebuilding the New Orleans of the 1850s, I'm definitely not interested. Being there, he would write, was like I had been invited to a private, secret meeting of the Rex and C.O.W.S organizations. Others there tell a different story. Bill Hines, the attorney, had served on Nagin's 8-person transition team and was still part of Nagin's unofficial kitchen cabinet. He sat with the mayor and remembered him saying little. Certainly he didn't offer anything like the speech he included in his memoir. There was no talk of making New Orleans a whiter or less poor city, Hines said, only a lot of dry talk of the best way to de-water the city, fix the infrastructure, and rebuild the city's battered business community. Dan Packer also didn't recall any speeches. I remember the mayor sitting and listening a lot, Packer says. Jimmy Reese also remembered the mayor saying little and being quite perturbed by it. An investment banker friend of his asked, "Mr. Mayor, what recovery plan do you have for us?" Reese and others in Dallas that day quote Nagin as responding, "I don't have a plan." The investment banker asked more gently, "Then what resources do you have to call upon to help us draw up a plan?" An expressionless Nagin offered a single-word response: nil. They were still meeting when the mayor excused himself to take a call. Joe Canizero, a wealthy white real estate developer and financial supporter of Nagin's, was on the line. Canizero lived in Old Metairie, a leafy suburb just over the city line. Canizero was a personal friend of the president's and had been a regular contact with Karl Rove since shortly after the storm. "Now take this down, Mr. Mayor," Canizero said in his gravelly voice. Cradling the receiver in one ear, Nagin pulled pen and paper from his pocket. Canizero repeated the words Rove had just shared with him. "Tell your mayor not to give us a list of everything he's ever wanted. Let's focus on getting government back and operating." Rove had also stressed the need for a blue ribbon panel of business people and other community leaders, a group who could vouch for a rebuilding plan before the federal government committed to spending the tens of billions of dollars New Orleans would no doubt be requesting. Jimmy Reese lobbied for a similar commission when he and the mayor spoke after the meeting. It didn't need to be just business people, Reese counseled. Add people like Scott Cohen, the president of Tulane, and maybe a couple of religious leaders. The mayor seemed receptive, but then Reese was frustrated that 1 week passed and then a second without any announcement from the mayor's office. The city had a visitor while Nagin was still in Dallas. 10 days after Katrina, Vice President Dick Cheney arrived for his first look at New Orleans. With the mayor out of town, it fell to Greg Meffert, the city's chief technology officer, to greet the vice president. A portly techie with blazing blue eyes hidden behind blowing bangs, Sally Foreman said when summing up Meffert, a left-brain genius with a garbled delivery that made her and the mayor nervous. But with the mayor away and his chief of staff and other top aides in Baton Rouge, Meffert was also the highest-ranking city employee in New Orleans. Meffert greeted Cheney at Harrah's, where NOPD had set up temporary quarters. "Mr. Vice President, I'm Greg Meffert, the senior on the ground, welcoming you to New Orleans." The vice president was dressed casually in a blue dress shirt and tan slacks. Meffert, by contrast, was wearing whatever he'd found on the floor. He was still at the Hyatt and had not showered or shaved since the storm. "Where the hell did you come from?" were the first words out of the vice president's mouth, Meffert said. And then the next thing he says is something about the way I smelled. McFirt can't remember the vice president's exact words, but he's certain of what he said next. Fuck you. He left the vice president to find his own way while he was in town. Context of White Supremacy, and that is where we will pick up at for the second audio segment, Chapter 7, beginning of Chapter 7. That's where we'll pick up at for beginning of audio segment number 2. Context of White Supremacy, book study session. Number to dial is 641-715-3640. Number again, 641-715-3640. The code is 564943 pound. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. For folks who are listening in who do not want to use the phone, you can use the free VoIP line, VoIP. It's linked when you go. If you're on Black Talk Radio Network, you'll see the link. If you need the link, it is tiny.cc/1race. And that is the number 1. tiny.cc/1race. So you put in the address, look on the left side, you'll see the link for the VoIP, free caller. Click the link. You will see it'll open a small window on your screen. The first line, it's a drop-down menu. Select the number that I just gave out, which again is 641-715-3640. Select that number. The next line, it will ask for the code. That code again is 564943. And then the final line, it will ask for a name. You can put in nickname, you can put in your real name, whatever you're comfortable with. You can click random keys. Once you get all the information filled in, just click the green button at the bottom. It will connect you to the program. You should be able to hear us. It is the same procedure. If you would like to participate, press star 6. Once you do so, you'll hear the audio prompt. Press the number 1 and should be able to get you on the line if you have comments you would like to share on Mr. Rivlin's book. With that, folks who have commentary who would like to share, feel free. We'll hit the phone lines. Let's see. Looks like we have, I think this is Thomas in New York. Only person who has commentary at the moment. Thomas in New York, did you have comments you wanted to share? Not sure. He might not be able to participate. Not have his line open at the moment.
Hello, can I be heard?
Oh, yes, sir. We can hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I always have to figure out how to turn the mute off. Good evening to you, Gus. Good evening to the rest of the callers who are there. Had just a couple observations to make. Throughout the whole Katrina rehashing that we're doing, I've been trying to remain codified and give Mayor Ray Nagin the benefit of the doubt. And, we live in the whole experience, and just remembering how at the time I felt like he just totally mismanaged the situation. And seeing how he backed down to the white establishment at the time, seeing how especially, at first he was very angry at Bush, it seemed like, but then he went out his way to make it seem like, the president was innocent, had nothing, he just didn't know. seeing him call black people looking for food and medicine looters and worse things on CNN, saying anyone caught looting would go straight to Angola. And, first, before I go further, I mean, it was ironic that 2 weeks before Katrina hit, I saw a documentary on Angola, not the country, the prison I'm talking about. And they named the Angola after I remember them saying, they named the Angola after the place that most of the slaves came from. And Angola is a prison that's larger than Manhattan. Like I live in Manhattan with 1.7 million other people, and this prison is larger than Manhattan. And on the documentary, they had black men on the side of the road just with sledgehammers breaking rocks. But, I don't know how many hours a day, white men watching them on horseback. What it was very reminiscent of, So I remember explaining that to someone who I was watching the news with at the time. Like, he's talking about that prison I just saw a documentary on, and I was explaining it. So when I heard him say that, back to Nagin, and I felt like the conditions in New Orleans were just horrible before Katrina even hit. Like, I mean, I've lived in black cities, and I've been to other, black areas. I mean, it just was terrible. And, I hate to say, that someone got what they deserved, but when you just read this part, and I didn't really remember it, but when he was talking to Oprah, and he went on her show, and they said that he gave.
Oh, looks like Thomas in New York might have got disconnected. Perhaps he will bring us back in so he can finish his commentary about Mr. Nagin's visit to Oprah Winfrey. I do remember that. I think for a lot of folks that was one of the memorable TV moments from way back when. Let's see. Oh, it looks like he dialed back in pretty quick. We'll see if we can nab him back so he can finish his commentary there. Thomas in New York should be back with us. You want to pick back up?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. My phone sprint. But when he gave the unsubstantiated account that the 7-year-old girl was being raped at the Superdome on Oprah to her audience of mostly dangerous white women, to me, like, that's, man, I'm glad he's in prison now. It's like, come on, man, you didn't even know that for sure. You should have told that guy to shut up and kept on with the interview and not even mention something that was unsubstantiated, especially after you started reading about the white gentleman who said, we're going to have these niggas in our school, they're going to start raping our kids. I mean, like, that's just the stigma that they have for us. And as a black man, to even go on television and say that without knowing, that's just appalling to me, Yeah, I hate to say that. Just another note I made was the author gave the impression that this Mayor Landrieu, a white man, was a great mayor for blacks because he one of the things I remember he said, you reading that, he said that he made the stores have to hire blacks as clerks. And Landrieu, I don't know too much about him. And, it's the first time I ever heard of him. Not too knowledgeable of, the politics of St. Louis. Not St. Louis, I'm sorry, New Orleans. But when the black mayor came in, he got blacks contracts. And, that's more important than just having a job working as a store clerk. Because, to this day we're denied contracts. And it kind of brought me back to this guy I used to work with, a white guy, who, when I asked him what he did prior to the job at the time, just a few years back, and he said he was a painter, and he didn't even know how to paint, but he was living in Delaware, and he was able to get contracts because he knew some people, he had some connections, and they would just send him places to go, mostly, and he said the housing projects in Delaware, and that he would paint people's house, and that's how he was able to stay afloat. And, just contracts like that and things in general that Landrew wasn't trying to give blacks. He wanted them to be store clerks, so how good was he really for blacks? Just made that little note while you read it, and I'll mute my line. Thank you.
Moon Landrew, he's the father of Mitch Landrew, who is the current mayor of New Orleans. At the time of the levee failure and Hurricane Katrina, he was lieutenant governor. He's also the father of Mary Landrew, who's the U.S. Senator for Louisiana at the time of Katrina. She just lost her Senate seat in November with the elections. The other folks who dialed in should be with us. I meant to say this before Thomas in New York chimed in. You were commenting on the book, just making sure, because we had a lot of last week. People were drifting. It's a general tendency for any of the books, but I think especially with this one, because it's talking about something that I think a lot of us watched 10 years ago. The tendency to drift and talk about, where things are now. That's going to happen in the book. Just make sure we're staying on roughly where we are time period wise from what we heard this week, because all of the stuff that happened subsequently is going to come up later in the book. So we'll get a chance to talk about it within context. The other folks that dialed in who had a hand up as well, you also should be with us. Feel free to get a hand in if you have commentary.
Greetings, everyone. I kind of came in on the probably the middle point of the first segment of reading. One thing I was captured by was the history. I think I heard some history of New Orleans, specifically in the 20th century. And that I thought was interesting, and it brought me to. I don't have a whole lot of comments on the specifics, but I do recall that. Correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't Huey Newton named after? I think he was the mayor or the governor. He may have been the governor of Louisiana. If not, he was the mayor of New Orleans. Huey Long.
Yes, sir.
Is that true? Yeah. I know it was one of them. I just couldn't think of a very famous white personality in the city of New Orleans. I think it was for some reason he. I think a lot of black people had a positive relationship with this white male. I'm not 100% sure on why, but I've heard an unusual amount of favorable look at this white male. I'm not sure on why, though, but I do remember hearing a lot about him. One thing that was not reported on that history, in 1965 in the city of New Orleans, the scheduled AFL, it was at the time it was called All-Star Game, was in the city, and the black players refused to play in it. 21 black males. This is something that's unprecedented. Refused to play in the game on how they were mistreated by businesses and average everyday white people in the city of New Orleans, and they declined to participate in the game and was moved to Houston. Something that's unprecedented. That still, nothing close to it has ever happened since. In line of black males showing a tremendous amount of self-respect that took place back during that time. I was just thinking about that when we was going over the history, but I'll wait to make some more direct comments on the book when the next reading is done. Thank you.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Greetings to you, Gus, and greetings to the other callers and listeners on the line. U.E.P. Long was the governor of Louisiana back in the 20s, and he was a good old boy that from the central Louisiana area, right up there, right below Shreveport, and he's one of those that they like to say raised himself up from the bootstrap. But one of the things that he kind of did, since he was one of these little country, as they were referred to as a redneck, he kind of blurred the lines a little with his interaction with the commoners and with black people. So that kind of put him in a somewhat favorable light with a lot of the blacks in that area, because he was not as overtly racist as most of those people were back in those times, especially during the Depression era when things were very bad. And what he did a lot of public works, things such as like a lot of hospitals and things of that nature that give blacks access to medical care, which they weren't allowed to have in that period. So that kind of, as I said, once again, made him put him in a somewhat favorable light. On this week's reading, with the giving the back history of what's with Ray Nagin, and I'm kind of glad that you went over it, because I had kind of forgotten a lot of the things that you went over this week with what went on with him. One of the things that you mentioned and of course with the Landrew family, which is one of those well-established families in that area, and as a couple of the callers mentioned with the father, how he kind of, give people clerk jobs and trying to kind of act the benign racist is basically the position that he played. He didn't reach out too much to blacks. He didn't rub shoulders too much, but he kind of extended a hand, but not as much to alienate himself with the white gentry class in the New Orleans area. But one of the things that kind of piqued my interest was when you went over with Ray Nagin and how his distancing himself, one of the first things that he has done with the crackdown on the lower levels, so-called criminals, and of course he threw in one of his relatives in with the bunch when he was doing the criminal roundup to make it seem as if, okay, you can't say I'm doing favoritism because I threw in a relative of mine in this suite. And it always went to the lower level people. It's the people who are not benefiting, the people who are getting the crumbs of the crime. But they got dragged, and he didn't go, not the big business people who were funneling this money, who were responsible for the criminal activity. They didn't get dragged in there, but it always the lower level ones. It's just the same way when we talk with the war on drugs or crimes or whatever. It's always the guy in the corner that's selling a rock or whatever. He's the one that always gets scooped up. But the people who are bringing it in, they never get caught up in this crackdown whenever they're doing it, because they know who are doing it, but they don't want to touch them because they know they're not supposed to touch them. They're only supposed to go after the low-hanging fruit. But Ray, with what Dutch Morial did when he first came into office, and with the contract that he was able to extend for the blacks in order to get contracts, is somewhat similar to what Maynard Jackson did in Atlanta when he came in as the mayor, where he says, okay, this is a majority black city, and if the contractors, whoever's going to get contracts here, the black people in here, they need to be able to get at the table, and they need to be able to get some of this contracting, or else nobody's going to get anything. And that is some of what he did in opening up the way, and as he said, even though it was about 17,000 what a contract that they were getting, and you can just look at that. This was in the late 70s, 80s when this was going. 17,000 is what they were getting versus what all of these other whites were getting in New Orleans. And when he left office 8 years later, they showed that the amount of money that they were able to get all together, and if you converted it into 2015 currency, it will be quite significant. But at least he did that much in order to help, opening the door and get black people moving along. The other thing that touched my interest was Ray Nagin when he left out of there 5 days into the recovery, the disaster recovery of Katrina, and he decided to hop that flight and come up to come up to Dallas to recoup. And that right there kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. And I know that's probably more likely what the author intended when he kind of focused on that, because it's like you were in the middle of a war and you coming out to take an R&R, and then you going back in and fighting. You just don't do things like that. It makes it seem that you are very insensitive. I know you need to decompress because it's a high-stress position, but then that's a job that you apply for. That's a job you applied for. That's a job you ran for. And even though that you got this part of the early in the career in your job, this disaster wasn't totally unplanned. You weren't planning for it. But this is what's going to make or break you and determine if you are qualified for leadership, if you can't function when something like this happens. And, and the way how they, and then all of these white people that he surrounded him with, the ones that funded him and put him into office, and they all came into Dallas, and they all sat around the table like vultures and pecking at the flesh and was telling him, he really and truly, he was in a no-win situation. He was in a very poor situation, and that right there, that first trip that he took to come to Dallas, to hop that ride on that helicopter or a private jet, that was the first nail that would start nailing into his coffin. And that they start using when they start building their case against him, when he did not start following the guidelines that they laid out for him that he was supposed to. They start keeping those, because white people have a very long memory. They do not forget anything, especially when you go against their wishes. And that is what did it for him. I'm going to pause here and let someone else get a chance to get it.
Right on. If other folks, if you have commentary, feel free. Don't wait till the last minute. We have about a little less than 30 minutes before we get to the second audio segment. Feel free to chime in 641-715-3640. I thought it was Mr. Demery Ford had said he was going to check out Ray Nagin's autobiography. I have to ask if he tunes in today or later on in the study session to see if he read Ray Nagin. He did a talk in 2011 in Atlanta, and he was saying that he was talking about some of the things in his book, and he said that in addition to the Crescent City Bridge incident, that there was another road that was deliberately closed by white people in Chalmette. I believe that's should be St. Bernard Parish. That's right, like southeast of the 9th Ward. He was saying that there was another road that was blocked off that route because they didn't want Negroes to come into their area and loot. He said it ended up backfiring on them. It ended up messing them up too because it flooded really bad in that area as well. I just haven't. He didn't mention the specific name of the street, nor did he mention, exactly to be, detailed about where this happened and all this. So I haven't been able to find confirmation, and Ray Nagin does not have credibility with me. In that same conversation, he said that they evacuated 95% of the city of New Orleans, which is, nothing could be further from the truth. That is just astronomically false. All of the evidence supports that. Their population was a little under 500,000 at the time, and just at the Superdome and Convention Center alone, there were 50,000 people, in addition to all the other thousands of folks that were on the interstate or died or whatever else they happened to be. So, he doesn't have any credibility, so him just saying that they did this for me is not enough. I would need more information. So if other folks can find, or if Mr. Demery Ford is reading his book and he gives more details about this other blockage, I'd be interested to know. Some of the things that stood out, the first thing at the end of chapter 4 where we started, where it kind of goes back to pick up where Mr. McDonald and they're trying to salvage the bank. I thought it was really important, the line where he's talking about the other white people that are in the central business district and the other well-to-do white people and comparing them to McDonald, where he says many of these white people who are out chilling and drinking down in the French Quarter and saying, hey, wasn't that bad? You know, still got our house, still got our business, everything is cool. And he says that these white men and women gathered at Geno's that night were McDonald's peers. He served on the same boards and commissions and knew them from meetings of the Chamber of Commerce, where McDonald was the presiding officer. Like McDonald, most seemed to be doubling up in satellite offices or working at borrowed desks. Alden is one of the city's 5 or 10 most prominent movers and shakers, said Patrick Quinn, a prominent developer and hoteler in town who, along with his wife, a state senator representing the western and northern suburbs, had taken up temporary residence in Baton Rouge. Perhaps it went without saying that few, if any, other blacks were on Quinn's list. I really appreciated him making it explicit that you had a lot of white people, even if they're supposedly peers, right? McDonald, they're all on the same level. They're all big wigs, making lots of money doing all this. It's still astronomically different in terms of what he's facing and trying to deal with all this and what they are facing. Were there white people who lost everything? Absolutely. Did they have the same obstacles and trouble that black people had in place to try to rebuild and get their lives back together? Absolutely not. And I don't even think we've gotten to most of that information that should be coming, but I appreciated that being made crystal clear and just the contrast and comparison. Really also appreciated, and I think some of this got touched on last week as well, Mr. McDonald, all the sacrifices that he's trying to make, increasing the daily limit that people can withdraw, upping it from $100 to $500, even though he ended up losing about $1 million on that, and just trying to do as much as he can to help out his black customers who he knows are struggling and have lost everything and are stuck wherever they are outside the state and going through this. Him in the midst of all this, still trying to do everything he can to help out other black people. Just astronomical. Black self-respect. Want to make sure that got included as well. Moving forward to some of the stuff with Ray Nagin. I think I said earlier this week, it's very difficult for me to have a lot of sympathy for Ray Nagin. As I said, just anyone, period, connected with Katrina, and you're coming out and saying things that are false, and I mean, to tell me that you evacuated 95% of the city, that's like a slap in the face. That's like you telling me that 1 and 1 is 5. Like, that is just clearly not accurate. So I have a hard time, that among other things, I have a difficult time being sympathetic with him. However, under the system of white supremacy, I'm really, really glad that he included white people are responsible for Ray Nagin being mayor in the first place. Now, for white people to, and powerful, these are not, ignorant, stupid. This was not Lance Hill. These were powerful white people. If I'm correct, I believe he said this was the guy who was in charge at the Times Picayune, who gets behind Ray Nagin and says, yeah, this is our guy. We want to lend him some money and see if he can do this. If you have white people who come in, they select a non-white person, and particularly in this city when there had been years of black mayors, you finally get black people to come in after Dutch Morial. You get black mayors to come in and run the city. We're tired of this. We're disgruntled about this. We want to be able to run things the way we want and have to deal with some nigger mayor in our town. We'll get Ray Nagin, who had no political experience. We found somebody who is, you might even say, is totally unqualified, who has no resume to say, hey, I can run a public office. I can be mayor of a major metropolitan city. Nothing on his resume. I mean, I guess you could say what he did at Cox, but running a cable company is not being mayor of a major city. You go get this guy and put him in, and then he doesn't do a good job. He appears to not be competent at times, particularly when you have this major moment of crisis. To me, in a system of white supremacy, that is still white people's fault. They are brilliant. I don't think anyone does it better at manipulating, managing situations so that people will end up being upset with a black person. And sometimes it will even be that black person did do some incorrect things, but white people have totally, and all I can say is I think that is the sophistication and brilliance of racism, white supremacy, when we talk about showcasing and all the other things that they can do to orchestrate and run a system of white supremacy while they are not the ones that are out front and seeing it, where everyone will get upset at Ray Nagin. You had tons of people who were upset with Ray Nagin, very disgruntled about the way he handled everything. Things before Katrina, during Katrina, after Katrina. Legions of black people who are furious about that. And I myself, I think, could come up with a pretty lengthy list of things that he didn't do correctly, or concerns that we have. But I just, it should be the white people. Make sure I get the white guy's name who is running the Times-Picayune, who put money up, and some of these other folks to see that he could get this office. Some of the other tidbits that I thought were instructive. I started this week's segment off with this sound clip where he called into the WWL. I guess that would be another one you could add to my list of things that I felt were incorrect that he did, comparing black people who were looking for food to crackheads who were jonesing for a fix. Long list of transgressions, in my opinion. Picking out a few of the he was endorsed. Ashton Phelps, that's his name at the time. So Ashton Phelps, Jimmy Reese, it should be all of the white people who put up money. They should be the ones that step forward as being most to blame, because if it hadn't been for you, he probably would not have won the mayor. It sounds like there was no chance that he would have won the mayor if it hadn't been for this influx of white cash. Some of the other things that stood out, let me see if I had any other, and I make sure I had some questions I wanted to get in as well. I really appreciated the history that we got this week of New Orleans, and there's going to be more of that in the next segment, just kind of tracing how we got to the point for New Orleans to look the way it did at the moment that Katrina struck. I guess the comment I can end right here, and then go and see if folks have other things that they would like to share. When they were talking about how after Reconstruction, right after Ben Tillman and company had won, and we're going to change things back and try to get it as close as we can to the way things were operating on the plantation. When they say that they had some quote-unquote school integration, but then after 1876 and they're done with all that, forget that. We're going back. Not only are we not going to have any more quote-unquote integrated schools, we are only going to educate black children up to the 5th grade. That sort of thing, I think, is astronomically important, because I heard a lot of people, I almost played the audio clip, saying these black people were ignorant. And it was a white caller, he dialed in the C-SPAN, and he said, Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton are to blame because they have not promoted education. The black people that stayed behind, they're ignorant, they're stupid, they're too stupid to even save their own lives. This is a failure of these people to respect and appreciate education, to go out and inform themselves so they could recognize when a disastrous hurricane is going to come and kill them all. If these people are ignorant, I'm not saying that they are at all, but fine, let's go. You're saying that they're ignorant. Okay, if they are ignorant, being in a city where white people have deliberately done everything they can to sabotage black education, that too would be white people's fault. I will pause there. Some people already gave their commentary on Mr. Nagin. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but just as logically, does that make sense? I mean, are we going to fuss at Ray Nagin? Because I'm everybody, VGQ, whatever position you take, Ray Nagin being in prison now. If we're going to start putting people in prison, shouldn't the white people that funded Ray Nagin, shouldn't they be in prison? Like, shouldn't the blame start there? Does that make sense, or am I talking crazy?
No, you're not. You're making perfect sense, which is why I said I was going to hold him as much. The comments that he said, they were very, very tone deaf and sensitive, especially what he said with Oprah when he went to the Superdome and he made a question about the stench. What do you expect people, how do you expect you to smell? Like roses after being locked up in that humidity. This is August. Anyone who's been to New Orleans knows it's hot, sticky anyway. But to be without AC and to be stuck in a place with all that many people with no proper running facilities, are you going to say and make that insensitive comment about these people? He was extremely tone deaf.
And he forgot toilet paper at the Superdome. Even he contributed if it did smell bad. In addition to the toilets backing up, I think the entire city of New Orleans smelled horrible after Katrina. You got dead bodies everywhere and raw sewage. I think the entire city smelled horrible, but specifically in the Superdome, I think that, or I know, the sewage backed up and was overflowing. In addition to, he forgot to even stock the place with toilet paper initially. So there were a lot of factors. Anybody else, Ray Nagin, any commentary they wanted to get in? Is that logical that if anybody was going to gripe and complain, even if we say Ray Nagin, and by some report, even some black people insist, and I think he could make a quality case, he is the worst mayor in the history of the United States. Even if that's true, that is white people's fault. Is that logical or is that nonsense? Any other comment? I know Thomas in New York City didn't agree. Folks don't have any other comment on Ray Nagin. That is cool in the gang as well. If folks had other comments they wanted to get in, we still have about 10 minutes before we get to the second audio segment.
Can I be heard?
You're a little low.
Hold on, let me switch. Yeah, I tried to come with that logic, Gus, but tough, man. It's tough. I understand they are to blame. I know it. I'm glad you put a name on it, but I mean, sometimes you're in a situation where it's you have to step to the plate. I mean, this was a disaster. Okay, and if he never came out and said anything bad about Bush to start with, I wouldn't really have a problem. But he came out, and I was like, okay. But then he canceled everything, and it was like, oh, man. And honestly, I think that's why he's being punished today, because he did come out and say what he said. If he just went along with the program and did exactly what the white people that put him in power wanted him to do, is stay quiet and just let it go down and, take the blame for everything, then I don't think he would be in greater confinement now. And lastly, I know it's off topic, but it's the same topic, sort of. If I was the lady that's leaving as the mayor of Baltimore, I wouldn't be surprised to see her end up in greater confinement a few years from now as well.
The person that dialed in 2420, if you had commentary as well, your line should be open.
Oh, yes. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay. I just wanted to make a quick comment on what you said about that the white people are to blame if Ray Nagin is in jail. What you said, if he's the worst mayor in history, it's their fault. I just wanted to make a quick point that, a lot of times when children, especially mainly African-American children, get in trouble for something, any sort of little crime, there's a push across the country now to go after the parents as well, blaming say that the parents are responsible for going after them. But that's not just with children, but with anything African-American, they kind of want to go after everybody and make everybody black accountable for it. But when the shoe's on the other foot, you get all of this, confusion, different messages in the media saying why people drop the ball and stuff like that, and you end up getting another job or something like that, or But yeah, that's all I wanted to add to it.
That portion. That's what I would want names on it. Everybody, when they say Uptown money poured into Ray Nagin's campaign, turning an also-ran into an unlikely front-runner. The slick new brochures, radio and TV ads, the campaign could now afford cast him as a fresh-faced, reform-minded businessman who could turn around New Orleans. The Times-Picayune endorsed him. He thinks on his feet, the paper's editorial board wrote. He is focused and innovative. And it talks about how one of their other newspaper did too. That's huge. The Times-Picayune, you come in with all of your credentials and long-running newspaper in the city, in the state, and you come in and put your weight behind him and endorsing this guy. We're supposed to look with you. You all have done your research, right? You got big-time staff members who get paid to research and what have you. You endorse this guy. You are to blame the gambit, whoever the white people are that run that, you are to blame. This is all, in my opinion, this is your fault. If it hadn't been for your money and you coming out with your words to promote this guy and say that he's great, he thinks on his feet, well, if he does, he would have displayed that during Hurricane Katrina. And I haven't heard anybody say that that was on display in September of 2005. Like I said, and I'm not sympathetic. Like I said, I hate that. I absolutely hate it when anybody, non-white people, anybody, come in and is just telling me blatant lies about something that's easy to verify that this is, whether or not this is true. But, white people are still the problem. Folks have other...
Okay, good. One more thing.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I think a year or two after Katrina, there was some PBS specials that I had watched. And I think I seen Trouble the Water at the time. Well, I don't know what I saw. But it was something where some of our people moved to Memphis, and they were having a hard time getting some of that FEMA money or getting checks because they couldn't prove their residency, but a lot of them were homeless or lost their identifications in the flood. And on this special, they were showing how people in, like, Cleveland suburbs and all over the country were applying for the money. They were getting up to, like, $1 or $2 million, and they didn't own any property or anything in New Orleans, and they were able to get some of this money. So all this money that poured in, a lot of rich people were able to apply and, get that money, get the welfare money,
right?
Their welfare money.
Right. I definitely appreciate it. I hope folks have robust sharing. I guess I'll just have to keep saying it. This book, most of it is not about the storm. Most of it is about everything that happened afterwards. So for this book, if we could stick to what's covered, because everything that's going to happen subsequently is going to come up later, including what you just mentioned. That's going to come up in detail. All of the looting that went on, either people not being able to get access to funds and how they went about doing it, or people not having ID so they couldn't get it, or other people just coming in and say, hey, I'm a Katrina victim, let me get some money, and they live in California or somewhere. But that's going to come up later. So just hang tight. That'll be coming up down the road. We'll be able to talk about that in greater detail, because there was, you have seen no looting until you see what happened when the money started to come in about all this. Other folks have commentary on the audio that we heard from this week? Oh, I meant to say, too, Deming Ford wasn't here. He asked last week about why they spent so much time on that Jimmy Reese and that Wall Street Journal article. And I was saying last week that article was so popular. It got so much attention. I think it was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal at the time. And it got referenced. It got talked about. I mean, it became infamous. Soon as we got off the air last week, Wendell Pierce, New Orleans native, was on Bill Maher and was talking about Katrina and his new book, which is also about Katrina and the recovery. He mentioned that Wall Street Journal piece and Jimmy Reese saying the black people are not coming back. He quoted it verbatim. And I said that is why he went into detail about this piece. He continues to be such a massively important document from, the first few hours after all of this. Anybody else have commentary they wanted to make sure they got in?
Gus, I'll look for this audio and I'll send it to you. The late Jackson Mayor Chokwe Lumumba. I remember hearing him. He did a speech. It was at Howard University. It was in November of 2005, right after the Katrina. And he talked about what happened in his city based on this, and the same thing that the lady that you had on, a couple of people from New Orleans was on, and was talking about how the white people were rescued and they were pulled out of vehicles if they were in places where there were too many black. Chokwe said in Jackson that white people who were in places where it was predominantly black, like for instance shelters, the white people came in there and took them out. He said that in the white section of town, their lights came on way before the other black parts of town, and their debris and all of that stuff was cleared. So this is not a fantasy or black people making up stuff, because Chokwe said so himself that he witnessed this himself, that he came in and that's what they did. They made sure that the white people got taken care of, and they left them air quotes niggas, leave them, they could manage by themselves.
I think that's going to come up in this book as well in terms of who got electricity first, who got resources. That's definitely going to come up in full detail. I can say, having been reading a lot of material on Katrina, I mean a lot. I just got another book today on Katrina-related material. That this is one of the few books this is the only book that I have read that is very explicit. I would count Michael Eric Dyson's as well, that is being very explicit in saying that this, I think he said it exactly, this was not an equal opportunity storm. Black people were more likely to have their homes, property destroyed and or to die in this. Black people were less likely to recover. Black people were less likely to return. Just everything was astronomically worse for all of the black people who had to suffer through and endure all of this devastation. I think even Anitra Brown with the New Orleans Tribune, I think she said it was the aftermath was way worse, at minimum equal to the damage from the levee failure and Katrina. I think it's on the other side. I'm confused. Everything is running together because I'm reading this book. I finished 5 Days at Memorial, which is about Memorial Hospital during Katrina. I finished that this weekend. I'm reading Douglas Brinkley's book right now, The Great Deluge, which is just about the first 5 days after the storm, covers some of this. He's also extremely critical of Ray Nagin. I've read the first 400 pages of his book, which is about a third of the book, and it's easily the person who has been subjected to the most criticism is Ray Nagin, but even within his criticism, he has to acknowledge the same thing. White people put this guy there, and really, white people put him there specifically to be the anti-black person. We want this guy to be there. He is classified as black, but we want him to be there operating against the interests of black people. Like that gets, it's at least 2 or 3 different books that I've read now that are talking about Ray Nagin, and that's what gets presented over and over again, regardless of what you think about his performance during Katrina or even before Katrina. At any rate, unless somebody had something 60 seconds worth, we're going to go ahead and get to the second audio segment on Chapter 7. That's where we're starting. Anybody have anything they wanted to get in within 60 seconds?
White flight. Starting with the end of the land use mayorship, right on up to Ray Nagin, and the percentage of whites that voted versus now the way how things are. It's being reversed back to the way it was when Landry was the mayor. Because right after he left office, whites start running out into the outlying suburbs. And it picked up speed even more. But right now, it's being reversed.
That's, well, part of that is coming up right now in Chapter 7. The other part is coming up way later. Way. Probably next month sometime we get closer to the end of the book. But right now, Chapter 7, the first part of that is coming. This chapter is titled Gary Rivlin, Katrina After the Flood. Context of White Supremacy. If you did not get a chance to share during the first audio segment, just, jot a note down or what have you. We should have ample time for folks to share once we get back. We will get started. Context of White Supremacy. Chapter 7. Cassandra. The people of New Orleans had plenty to complain about. They made that much clear to the eminent geographer Pierce F. Lewis when he arrived in New Orleans in the early 1970s. A major port city at the entrance to the richest valley on earth may have been inevitable, Lewis wrote in his seminal book, New Orleans, The Making of an Urban Landscape, published in 1976, but it also required its residents to live in a subtropical city surrounded by swampland. The summers were brutal, the mosquitoes were omnipresent, and the streets flooded after even a moderate rain. Hurricane season lasted 6 months each year, yet the people Lewis met couldn't imagine living anywhere else. Their native town was the Big Easy, a beguiling city home to costume parades, brass bands marching through the streets, and jambalaya. New Orleans, Lewis found, was a city that didn't work at selling itself because it didn't seem to dawn on locals that someone might prefer to live somewhere else. Lewis taught geography at Penn State more than 1,000 miles away, but he had shown up in New Orleans because he felt he had no choice. There was little geographical scholarship about New Orleans, yet could there be a more fascinating city in the United States, or one more preposterous from a geographer's point of view? The Mississippi River demands a city at its mouth, Lewis offered, but fails to provide any place for one. New Orleans is a transplanted Mediterranean city, he wrote in his book, but he also described it as the globe's northernmost Latin American one. Sugarcane grows in the area along with banana plants and bougainvillea, and at least until the advent of air conditioning, people sensibly took midday siestas. The United States had annexed New Orleans nearly 2 centuries earlier as part of the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, but in many ways it was still a foreign land. In New Orleans, a county is called a parish. The median bisecting a boulevard is the neutral ground, and, like the rest of Louisiana, the legal system is based on the Napoleonic Code. Its libertine spirit set it apart, as did its celebration of both the sacred and the profane in a stretch of the United States sometimes called the Bible Belt. Like others before and after him, Lewis labeled New Orleans the country's most eccentric city. But unlike his counterparts, he did not fixate on the city's voodoo priestesses or drag queens or the Mardi Gras Indians, the legions of black men in New Orleans who devote an inordinate amount of their spare time stitching together feathers into intricate costumes they'll wear only a few times. Instead, Lewis found the city's eccentricities in the garden districts, flamboyant mansions, the cast iron and pastels of the French Quarter, even people's accents, which he heard as more Brooklyn than Vicksburg. Technology is the villain in Lewis's book. Through most of its first 200 years, the citizenry of New Orleans harbored a healthy fear of floods. Most of the population confined themselves to the high ground and avoided parts of the city that lay below sea level. Then, early in the 20th century, a local engineer named A. Baldwin Wood invented a pump powerful and reliable enough to drain the swamplands and keep them dry even after a heavy rain. Land once off limits was now open to settlement, just as high-speed elevators changed the geography of New York City by making skyscrapers possible. Lewis wrote, "The Wood pump revolutionized the urban geography of New Orleans." The large tracts of marshy land that sat between the central business district and Lake Pontchartrain to the north were the first parts of the city to experience a metamorphosis. Wood's invention allowed speculators to develop Lakeview in the 1910s, among other communities there. That part of the city was off limits to black home buyers, but the Wood pump was also used to drain the black A-town swamps, those downriver from the French Quarter, to expand the lower Ninth Ward, among other communities. The Wood pump allowed New Orleanians to spread out and also to cut themselves off from one another. Technology, Lewis found, accelerated racial segregation rather than slowed it down. The Wood pump made New Orleans East possible, but first came the interstate, which did nearly as much to reshape the geography of New Orleans. It would have been unthinkable to build an elevated highway above St. Charles Avenue or Magazine Street, yet that's what happened on the other side of town in the 1960s when the city fathers mapped the I-10 through the center of Treme. "A white man's highway through the black man's bedroom," said one critic on the losing end of that fight. The interstate was built directly over Claiborne Avenue, the commercial center of black New Orleans. In its day, Claiborne was a handsome boulevard of large oak trees lined with businesses, most of them black-owned. By the time of Katrina, it was a strip of vacant storefronts under a thick slab of elevated concrete thrumming with traffic. Lewis judged it as nothing short of murder. Lewis was still researching his book when billboards sprang up on the I-10 advertising the newly christened New Orleans East. Speculators were homesteading large stretches of cypress swamp on either side of the interstate just past the new high-rise bridge that carried people over the industrial canal heading east toward the Gulf Coast. The pitch was simple: a small patch of suburban paradise inside the city limits and only a 20-minute drive from downtown. Yet the geographer read in horror the promotional materials used to sell this large swath sandwiched between two giant bodies of water, Lake Bourne and Lake Pontchartrain. On 20 square miles of spongy, low-lying, flood-prone land, developers imagined a community of 250,000 people. Advertisements played up the golf courses and nearby marinas, but remained strangely quiet about hurricanes, Lewis wrote. The East had been inundated with water after Hurricane Betsy in 1965. It flooded again 4 years later after Hurricane Camille, yet both those storms had supposedly delivered only glancing blows to the city. Coastal erosion added to Lewis's worries about a city he judged as having deficient land controls. The marshy wetlands of the Louisiana coast were a natural buffer against storm surge, the tidal wave of water that accompanies a strong hurricane. Yet the wetlands were disappearing at a rate of 25 to 30 square miles per year. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was partly to blame, starting with the choices it had made decades earlier when it first designed the area's flood protection system. The same levee system that protects New Orleans from the Mississippi River also prevents the wetlands from replenishing themselves. The sediment the river would otherwise be depositing at the mouth of the Mississippi was now ending up on the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. The Corps also built the Mr. Go shipping channel, which caused more deterioration. Another culprit were the navigation lane the oil and gas interests carved through coastal Louisiana to construct pipelines and move their heavy machinery to and from the area. These man-made canals caused salt water from the Gulf of Mexico to spill into the freshwater wetlands, killing freshwater plants that held the soil in place, causing more erosion. No longer were hurricanes' high winds the greatest threat, Lewis concluded, but the murderous tidal wave that one of these blasts off the Gulf Coast could provoke. When Lewis returned to New Orleans in the early 2000s to work on a sequel to New Orleans, he was disheartened. Everywhere he looked, the geographer saw a long list of afflictions: crime, declining schools, a grinding poverty, especially among black citizens. He found the city even more segregated and more intolerant than when he'd left it. As in most other big American cities, Lewis wrote, New Orleans' main malady is racial. Yet physical threats to the city were the ones that most alarmed Lewis. He had left New Orleans in the mid-1970s, hoping that more rational voices would defeat what he called the unrestrained greed by land sellers and house builders, but by the start of the new century, nearly 100,000 people lived in New Orleans East. To drive home his point about the vulnerability of those living in the East and other low-lying areas, he cited an article appearing in Scientific American near the end of 2001, Drowning New Orleans. New Orleans is a disaster waiting to happen. Its author, Mark Fischetti, wrote, if a big, slow-moving hurricane crossed the Gulf of Mexico on the right track, it would drown New Orleans under 20 feet of water. Middle-class whites were the first to settle into the early subdivisions being built in New Orleans East. A couple could purchase a 4-bedroom, 3-bath home with a nice expanse of backyard for less than half of what it would cost uptown. Lakeview was closer to the center of town, but homes there were more expensive and generally smaller. Inevitably, blacks with money visited those model home developers had built for prospective home buyers. The passage of fair housing laws in the 1960s reduced aggressive discrimination and mortgages, in part because of Liberty and 2 small black-owned competitors that followed were becoming easier for African Americans to secure. Black people were testing the rules, testing the market, Alden McDonald, said, "First, it'd be one house in a community, then a second, then a third." The McDonalds moved to New Orleans East right after they were married in 1974. New Orleans East in the late 1970s was a kind of racial nirvana. There, the middle class and upper middle class, black and white, lived side by side and seemed to want more or less the same thing. It was like suburbia on steroids, said Beverly McKenna, a black woman who moved to a subdivision called Lake Willow Estates in 1977. You could fish in the lake. There was a beautiful shopping center. Everyone not black, everyone not white. Life. A graduate of Indiana University, McKenna had taught high school English before quitting to raise a family. Her husband, Dwight, was a surgeon. Their neighbors, whatever their race, were lawyers and accountants and junior executives commuting each morning to a downtown office tower. "That's what makes me so sad and angry," McKenna said. "It was such a beautiful little community." McKenna and her husband started noticing the for sale signs shortly after they moved in. The tipping point McKenna eventually figured out was when nearly as many black families lived in a subdivision as white ones. Alden McDonald called it round 2 of white flight, the transformation of New Orleans East into an almost all-black community. "We were people moving in who had as much money as they did," said McKenna, who within the decade would revive the New Orleans Tribune as a monthly newspaper. "We were as well educated. We spoke the same English. We drove the same cars. But these people were moving because of us." She thought of a neighbor, a white man, who lived in a large white antebellum home that made McKenna, a northerner, think of a southern plantation. A good-natured man, he stayed longer than most, but that only meant she had more time to eye him mistrustfully. "I barely said hello to him," McKenna said. "It was a defense mechanism. I didn't feel very welcome, and so I wasn't very welcoming myself." Yet a new and more modern New Orleans was the animating idea that gave life to the East, not integration. The area was still a magnet for strivers and achievers, according to J.B. Borders, who, after Katrina, wrote a long feature about the East for the New Orleans Tribune. The outlines of an Afropolitan utopia could be glimpsed. There was an ice skating rink where Beverly McKenna and the other moms would bring their children. There were upscale restaurants, and whatever you wanted to buy, you could find out in the East, McKenna said. The former teacher praised the local schools, the city's successful black entrepreneurs, and some of its ball players, and even a televangelist moved into Eastover, a gated community of McMansions boasting its own golf course. Meanwhile, the city's postal workers and clerks and truck drivers bought in Little Woods and Pines Village, where the homes tended to be small, tidy cottages. They were the children of the hotel and restaurant workers who made the city run, the offspring of its elevator operators and custodians. The East, Alden McDonald said, meant that for the first time in New Orleans history, the African American community had seen significant wealth creation that they could hand down to the next generation. Yet other changes came to the neighborhood once its population shifted from white to black. Landlords who once only rented to aspiring young professionals were now happy to accept the government's Section 8 vouchers and house lower-income residents. Eventually, so many poor people were living in the apartment buildings along the service roads and main arteries that, at the time of Katrina, according to one community group, 40% of the city's government-subsidized housing was located in New Orleans East. The retail face of the community also changed. Pawnbrokers and check cashers and payday lenders opened storefronts at the bottom of the off-ramps. So, too, did Dollar General, Family Dollar, and the Dollar Tree. The East had a Mason Blanche and a D.H. Holmes, two of the area's earlier department stores, but both shut their doors. A Sears closed down, and so too did a Dillard's. Lake Forest Plaza was open when Katrina hit, but was already dying before it was drowned under 8 feet of water. McDonald was part of a group that organized to fight for the East in the early 2000s. On Wednesday nights, people would meet in a conference room at Liberty Bank trying out their ideas for bringing higher quality restaurants, better stores, and amenities to the East. Liberty funded a study to document the great sums of discretionary income sloshing around New Orleans East. A second one showed how the East had become a dumping ground for the city's problems. McDonald, who often pitched the businesses they were trying to lure to the East, had even put up some of his own money to open a 12-screen movie theater on the site of the old Sears parking lot. The city put up several $1 million in federal redevelopment money as well in what McDonald characterized as a risky venture to prove that New Orleans East was a community worth investing in. We were very close to getting some national restaurants out here, McDonald said. We were getting close on some big retail. And then Katrina hit. Cassandra Wall was as shocked as anyone else that she bought in New Orleans East. Wall had always seen herself as an uptown girl, even if technically she grew up in Central City on the woolly fringes of the Garden District. Central City suggested black and low income, but though there was no denying her skin color, she had not grown up poor. Her father was a contractor who made good money buying and restoring dilapidated properties. Her mother an English teacher who taught all her girls to enunciate and drilled them in good grammar. Wall grew up a few blocks from St. Charles and attended the Xavier University Preparatory School, a fancy Catholic girls' high school on Magazine Street. Even the grand 2-story Victorian home they grew up in set the Walls apart from most of their Central City neighbors. This 150-year-old jewel had been restored by their father, who had kept the original chandeliers, the flocked wallpaper, and the crown moldings. Like any good uptown family, they ate on china and drank from crystal during formal meals. I've always appreciated the finer things in life, Cassandra said. We're all that way. Yet she was a public school teacher who earned extra money teaching composition and literature at Xavier and the University of New Orleans. She had married a hospital technician. The finer things in life would mean a 2-story, 3-bedroom, 2-bath home in New Orleans East for under $200,000. Cassandra Wall was the oldest of 4 girls, or 5 if you included her cousin Robin Braggs, whom they all referred to as a 5th sister. Growing up, Cassandra was the child in the corner reading a book, the rule follower who never got into trouble. All the girls heard it growing up. Why can't you be more like Cassandra? The perfect pill, Cousin Robin said of Cassandra. Cassandra attended Xavier University, a 10-minute drive from their house, and then moved west when offered a fellowship to the University of Oregon. There she earned a master's in English literature and secured teaching jobs at Portland State and a local community college. Cassandra moved back to New Orleans in the 1980s after an 8-year stint on the West Coast that included a first marriage that ended in divorce. Cassandra's sister, Tangi, was the first Wall sister to move to New Orleans East. In 1982, Tangi and her then husband, both still in their 20s, bought a 3-bedroom, 2-bath in Little Woods. A decade later, they traded up to Eastover, a gated community where for $400,000 or $500,000 you could buy the same size house that would cost $2 million uptown. The black aristocracy lived in Eastover. Cassandra followed Tangi to the East in 1990. She lived briefly in a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that she bought for $65,000 before remarrying and moving to Tamarin Estates, a more upscale subdivision that ranked somewhere between Little Woods and Eastover economically. Her younger sister, Talmadge, whom they called Petty, followed her sisters when a year later she and her husband bought a home near Cassandra's. The final Wall sister, Contess, bought in the East a year after that. Robin followed a few years later when she bought around the corner from Petit. Petit, the baby, was more of a party girl. She could have excelled if she pushed herself a little harder. Cassandra tisk-tisked. The sisters had the usual assortment of resentments, tensions, and buried feelings that form among any group of siblings. The others loved Contess, but she could also be exhausting. It's always been Contess against the world, Petit said. Tangi, the second-born, had always been the intrepid one. She was the leader who had the others following her even when they were small. That was also the role Contess sought for herself. Contess wants to be in charge, Robin said. Corrected Petit, she thinks she's in charge. Yet it would be challenging to find a group of 5 women any closer or more similar in their likes and habits. New Orleans East stretched along a half-dozen highway exits, yet the 5 sisters all chose homes off the same one. None lived more than a few minutes' drive from the others. All of them lived what Petit called the big, easy lifestyle. If you have the money, you spend it and enjoy it. You saw it in the $400 shoes they sometimes bought or the cars they drove. We only act like we're rich, said Robin. Sunday nights meant dinner back in Central City, where their mother always used the good china and the heavy silverware. They had their standing Thursday night dinners, and after Cassandra remarried, Petit's 3 kids had a younger cousin. Almost every day, or so it seemed, some combination of them were coming together. The husbands got along, and the sisters and their cousin also had entanglements through a variety of partnerships they formed. Cassandra helped Tangi with an art business she ran on the side, which required the occasional trip to Europe together. Petit illustrated a children's book Contess wrote and self-published through a company she named 4 Walls of Success. And it seemed practically every week that at least several of them would get together for one of their epic shopping expeditions. That's when we really had fun, Petit said. Cassandra didn't want to leave ahead of Katrina. None of the sisters did. They spent Saturday evening phoning one another, each at home watching the storm coverage and hoping for consensus. We're leaving. We're staying. They changed their minds all night. The old maps of New Orleans described the area as Cypress Swamp, but it had never come up that they lived at least several feet below sea level. They decided to leave only after Nagin on Sunday morning declared the city's first ever mandatory evacuation order. I'm thinking, wait, this is unprecedented. I'm out of here, Robin said. They broke into 2 groups. Cassandra, Tangi, and Contess formed one caravan, Robin and Petit another. They would head west and north and reconnoiter in Baton Rouge. Petit had been the last holdout. She had a 2-year-old Doberman in heat and a pit bull puppy she was training. Her husband, who worked on a ship that ran supplies to the oil rigs, was at sea and motoring toward safe waters. You all can take Garrett, Petit said of her son, then 15 years old. I need to stay. The sisters took turns calling to talk sense to Petit while Robin stuffed the back seat of her Honda with half her closet. You're packing all this stupid stuff, Petit told her. Petit eventually relented, but then only brought a nightgown, a single pair of pants, a couple shirts, the sandals she had on, and inexplicably a pair of ridiculously impractical and expensive beaded shoes she had just bought. Robin had been hoping to hit the road by 1 p.m., but punctuality isn't a wall trait. It would be closer to 4 p.m. when Robin pulled from the curb, followed by Petit, her son, a dog in heat, and a puppy in a Toyota 4Runner. Facing terrible traffic, they tried to take a shortcut that had them 6 hours later stopping for the night on the outskirts of Jackson, Mississippi, hundreds of miles from where they were supposed to be. The other three sisters left New Orleans at around 1 p.m., yet didn't reach the outskirts of Baton Rouge, 70 miles away, until 10 p.m. It was a little past midnight when the group of them arrived to take the last two empty rooms in a charmless microtel at the crossroads of the city's two busiest highways. Eventually, they take up almost an entire floor as Petit and Robin join them later in the week along with their mother and stray members of their extended family. For at least a few of them, the microtel would be home for more than 6 months. They stared bleary-eyed at CNN. Those first few days were an enervating drone of anchors, a miasma caused by the same few images playing in an endless loop. They didn't dare turn off the TV out of fear of missing something. With the rest of the country, they learned that Uptown and their mother's home had largely been spared, and also the Quarter and the Central Business District. They learned that big sections of the lower Ninth Ward had been destroyed and that Lakeview was covered by water. Eventually, they started turning channels, but not once did any of them hear a newscaster mention New Orleans East. A well-off black community did not fit television's narrative about poor blacks and well-off whites. They constituted 1/5 of the city's population, Tangi said, but it was as if our community didn't exist. The sisters ran into neighbors they knew or at least recognized at the Walgreens and at Walmart buying cheap clothes. "You hear anything?" they'd ask, but no one knew anything. A couple of the sisters even ran into their state legislator while visiting the mall. She had the same weird look on her face that we all did, Robin said. All they had were rumors of government plans to bulldoze the East and a plot by the government to seize people's land to build a new airport. There was even talk of entire subdivisions sinking back into the swamp, Contest said. 10 days after Katrina, Tangi and Robin ran into a neighbor named Max Slan at the Shoney's near their hotel. Slan was eating breakfast with his wife and mother. The group of them were having the same conversation nodding acquaintances were having in Baton Rouge and all over the country until one of them brought up the idea of organizing a meeting. Slan knew a local Baptist minister who agreed to let them hold a meeting in his church's community center. "Are you from New Orleans East?" read the handwritten flyer they posted at every Days Inn, La Quinta, and Super 8 they came across driving the area's highways. People were invited to show up that coming Monday, September 19th, 3 weeks after the storm, at the True Light Baptist Church. The first meeting was more like a reunion, Tangi said. At least 700 people, the sisters and Slan agreed, showed up at a gathering marked by a lot of hugging and crying. Hundreds more showed up the following Monday when Tangi surprised even herself by proposing that they defy the blockade keeping New Orleans East off limits even to residents. Tangi would shut down the I-10 if she thought it would bring attention to our issues, Max Land said. She was always ready to rumble. Cassandra too, though she'd show up wearing high heels. The next day, a convoy of more than 70 cars, many of them luxury sedans with new car sparkle, took off in the early morning hours from a Lowe's parking lot just south of Baton Rouge. As a group, we decided that it was our constitutional right that there was no law in the land that could prevent us from seeing our homes, Tangi said. In the end, they'd get an escort into the city from police commander. Chapter 8. He said, she said. Ray Nagin had coffee with Minister Louis Farrakhan, the controversial leader of the Nation of Islam, his last morning in Dallas. The two had first met a few months earlier when Farrakhan was in town to give a series of talks. Nagin had sought out Farrakhan. Nagin had attended the Million Man March in Washington, D.C. 10 years earlier in 1995 and had been surprised that he felt as moved as he did when all those black men stood together on the mall and recited in unison their commitment to improving myself, my family, and my people. Nagin remembered the experience when he saw one of the city's intel sheets that Farrakhan was coming to New Orleans. He had enjoyed their first meeting and was pleased when he heard the peripatetic minister's voice on his BlackBerry. They met at the Dallas airport before Nagin flew home to New Orleans. Nagin had been monosyllabic with Jimmy Reese and friends that Saturday. With Farrakhan on Monday morning, Nagin spoke as an intimate. Farrakhan, Nagin said, was keen to hear about how the levees had been breached. They had been dynamited before. Was there any wonder some in the black community suspected it had happened again? Did they bomb the levees? Farrakhan asked Nagin. Rather than offer an emphatic no, Nagin repeated the official story as he had heard it. The loud, explosive noise people had heard in the Ninth Ward was most likely the sound of water, mud, and debris roaring through the community and demolishing homes. We've yet to see any evidence to the contrary, the mayor said carefully. The two spoke for about an hour. Their meeting ended with Farrakhan offering a friendly warning. You're now a high-profile black man in America, he said, and therefore a target. Be very careful, the minister advised, adding, Salam alaikum. Peace be unto you, in Arabic. Salam alaikum. Nagin repeated, adding a sir. That night, the mayor ate dinner with George Bush. Nagin never called Kathleen Blanco back. Blanco only learned the mayor was in Dallas because her people were picking up chatter about a big invite-only meeting there. 5 days with my family at that point would have been nice, she said. The two would see one another face-to-face if the president or some other notable was in town and protocol demanded that the mayor and the governor both be there. But otherwise, there was little direct contact. It wasn't just me, Blanco said. He stayed holed up in that hotel room, scared to death, having no idea what to do. Through intermediaries, she offered a helicopter to bring him to the state capitol. She passed word that she was in New Orleans a few times a week, helping to oversee the state's part of the disaster recovery. If he had gotten himself into Baton Rouge, Blanco said, if he would just agree to meet with me. Eventually, Blanco hosted a lunch for Nagin at the executive mansion, but that meeting had been arranged by their respective communication directors for the television cameras and photographers. It hampered their recovery, Blanco said. It meant everything took longer, and it also harmed the reputation of a governor for whom New Orleans' fate was also largely her own. In a different world, Blanco might be seen as a kind of superwoman. She alone had taken Katrina seriously among top leadership in the Gulf Coast. That Thursday, Blanco was supposed to be in Atlanta for a meeting of the Southern Governors Association. Though she was slated to be sworn in as the group's chairwoman, she canceled the trip to stay closer to home. By Friday night, Blanco had declared a state of emergency. That was a day ahead of both Nagin, who was worried about the impact of a mandatory evacuation on the city's tourist trade, and Haley Barbour, the governor of Mississippi, where an estimated 300 people died in the storm and thousands were left homeless. It was 2 days ahead of Bush. The president mentioned Iraq 8 times in his weekly radio address that Saturday, but did not bring up Katrina. The National Hurricane Center was doing its job by warning emergency response directors across the region about the monstrous Category 4 or 5 storm bearing down on New Orleans, yet in Washington, a FEMA supervisor with 25 years' experience bemoaned a lack of urgency inside the agency's Washington headquarters. They weren't ordering buses for an evacuation, he would tell a pair of reporters from the Wall Street Journal. They weren't into the fray as FEMA has the power to do. Nagin spent much of Saturday, 5 hours, on the set of LeBeau, a kids' film being shot on location in New Orleans. Afterward, he had dinner in Lakeview with his wife and daughter. Blanco, in contrast, was counting down the hours to a massive storm. On Saturday, she put both her staff and Louisiana National Guard on alert and set herself up in the state's Emergency Operations Center. Concerned that the storm wasn't being taken seriously enough in New Orleans, she pestered Nagin and instructed her people to enlist the help of any legislator representing a New Orleans district. Her staff also pushed some of the city's better-known ministers to encourage people to evacuate during their Saturday morning sermons. On Sunday, George Bush reached Blanco on her cell phone to tell her that New Orleans needed to be under a mandatory evacuation order. She told the president he had reached her at a press conference in the city where Nagin was doing just that. Context of White Supremacy. We will pick up there next week, Chapter 8. We're a little way into Chapter 8. For folks who would like to participate, the number to dial, 641-715-3640. The code is 564943 pound. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. We should have about 30 minutes left, so please don't wait till the last minute. Go ahead and get your hand up if you would like to chime in. First thing, I just wanted to share, really appreciate the participation because I've been reading a lot of Katrina material, and just audio, right, listening to a book takes a lot longer. It's a lot less efficient than just going ahead and reading the book. Like you can read a lot faster if you're just reading to yourself in your head as opposed to reading out loud, right? So just to give you an idea, like us doing one a week, how inefficient it is. I think in the time since we started this book, I have read 2 different books. I think one of them was like 1,000 pages. This book, I think, is only like 500 pages. So it's really inefficient. So the payoff for this is being able to chat with Demery Ford and Thomas in New York, and today we even got Sarah, so I mean, wow, I'm elated. So definitely appreciate the participation, getting to hear a lot of different perspectives, because you all think of a lot of things that I wasn't thinking of, or just different angles, so definitely appreciate being able to have folks to chime in. The other point, I cannot believe we're talking about this. It is 50 years since Hurricane Betsy in 1965 devastated New Orleans. A lot of black people suffered then as well. It's September 9th. That's September 9th. They had a special on just the other day showing some of the flooding and devastation with Hurricane Betsy. And the last bit, there were 2 bits of the foreshadowing where Minister Farrakhan says their meeting ended with Farrakhan offering a friendly warning. You're now a high-profile black man in America, he said, and therefore a target. Be very the foreshadow. I would assume most people who are going to read this book already know what happens. So I just thought that was hilarious. And then he had another bit where he talks about Ray Nagin being on the set for this kids film, Levee, and that is footnoted. If you click the footnote, it says Nagin was there as an actor to play the part of a corrupt mayor. And that's, I guess I would just go back to my point that I was saying before. Man, I could totally see white people being so crafty that they already had a narrative. Katrina, you can't predict that or anyway, even without that, they could have their plan set up that, we're going to get him. Like, regardless, we already got this. Like, yeah, go ahead. Yes, you're going to be the corrupt mayor. Wink, wink. and then lo and behold, anyway, the folks who would like to chime in, feel free. Everyone who has a hand up, line should be open.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yes. That's, I don't know, man. They have technology that can create the hurricane these days. Wouldn't be surprised if they used it. Next thing I wanted to add was another great, section of little tidbits of history as far as how some of the communities formed in that lower section of New Orleans, and of course the white flight. Yeah, but man, it didn't matter if you was rich or poor, as long as you were black. They put you in an area where they knew it was going to be flooded, and I think it also goes to show is, hurricanes, like if it was a natural hurricane, they are unpredictable. Betsy was 1960, and if you lived through Betsy, you talk about 2 or 3 generations later, there's Katrina. They don't have that same recollection. So, someone who survived the 1960 Betsy hurricane, they probably, the next time they would have heard time to evacuate, they would have been gone. But now you're dealing with 2 or 3 generations later, and they didn't have that, they didn't have that same experience.
I'm snickering just because Ray Nagin is a New Orleans native. He was there when.
He was born in 1955, right?
He was there. He's talked about being there for Hurricane Betsy, even though his house didn't flood, but he was there. He remembered.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, well, those, I have my feelings about Ray Nagin. I'm sorry. I mean, I think, and to go back on what you said earlier, Ray, I think he deserves what he got, but the people who put him there, they deserve to be drowned in the toxic sludge. I mean, this whole situation is it was just like festering. Everyone knew it was going to happen. They knew the engineering wasn't good. I mean, it's just undescribable how many people should go to jail with them. I mean, all down the line through the years, just everyone knew. I mean, by you doing this to drain these floodlands, it's going to deplete the soil here, and that's going to be bad for that. And by you trying to keep back the Mississippi, you're really pushing this. I mean, it's just this is probably a place that they probably just shouldn't have built anything. I mean, I honestly, you need a pump to keep the water out running 24 hours a day. That should have told you something, I'll mute my line for now. Thank you for taking my call. And I do, unfortunately, I'm not a fast reader, so I wouldn't even try to get it, because you read like my mother. I mean, you're a fast reader. I wouldn't be able to keep up, and I do love these segments because, like you just said, I do like to hear everyone else's input on these things, because I think all the books that we've done since I've been participating I've learned so much, and I appreciate it.
Likewise. Wasn't that somebody else that have commentary?
Yes, sir. I myself do remember Hurricane Betsy, 1965. It was the first hurricane of my memory. I was somewhere around 8 years old at the time, and I can recall my father putting up the boards on the windows and the tape on the. Some people were putting tape on their windows and whatnot, and it did do some damage. I don't think it was the worst of the worst down here. And in turn, I'm pretty sure it went, once it went through South Florida, it went to the Gulf Coast, which a lot of hurricanes do take that path. So that gave me a memory as far as that's concerned, being that was the first hurricane that I had a memory of. The name of it, Betsy. It was kind of profound on Minister Farrakhan, kind of like giving a friendly warning to Mr. Nagin. Just based on logic. Once you have a understanding of the system of racism, white supremacy, you can kind of like, figure out things. When it comes to even with dealing with certain individuals or certain events that or in and around yourself and other non-white black people. Some people would think, well, that person can predict the future and that sort of thing. It's just basically there's a logic, the logical thought, that hey, you got to be careful. This time, and to him, he probably should have interpreted it as it's time to pay. It's time to pay master for what they assisted me to get to this particular position. Now it's time to pay up. That sort of thing. I hope wherever he is, he's attempting to learn, have a better understanding of the system of racism, white supremacy. Being I think he's still alive, right? I heard he last stop was in greater confinement, but that
he's still alive. He's still alive.
Okay, yeah, he developed some greater understanding of the system of racism, white supremacy, what it is, and how it works. But that was kind of profound. I did chuckle a little bit, that he ran into Minister Farrakhan, and that was his basically his interaction with him. I thought that was kind of interesting. That's it.
Any other folks have commentary they want to make sure they get in?
Quickly, man, I wonder if that meeting with Farrakhan was the last straw for the white people. Like, we're gonna get this nigga because.
Oh yeah,
I remember they took our city off because he had Farrakhan on and he didn't ask the questions they wanted him to ask them, and they took him off the air with the #1 show in America, and that late night at the time. So I could just see that being like their last straw. Like, oh, he not only talked about Bush, he came back from that, but he met Farrakhan. Like, oh no, he has to go.
Right. I did notice his next appearance, according to what you read, Gus, was after he had that conversation with Mr. Farrakhan. He went to see the president, and I mean, it's just a no-brainer to understand that these people had an awareness on who he was conversing with, and that right there, definitely for a non-white black person who is a victim of racist white supremacy that you are kind of like giving some position to, that's a no-no right there. That you have any type of favorable conversation with a non-white black person of Mr. Farrakhan. That's you doomed after that. I'm not sure if he was aware of it, but he's aware of it now, I guess.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. It said that Ray Nagin picked up on the intel report that Minister Farrakhan was going to be in town. So that alone tells you that he was being tracked. Minister Farrakhan was being tracked, and he had access to this kind of secret report to know what was going on before Farrakhan got in touch with him. So I'm sure if he picked it up on that report, then that meeting that he had with Minister Farrakhan, it was also monitored, and that was a couple more nails that got nailed into his coffin as far as to why it is that they were going to start piling dirt on him to try and get him out. But to answer the other callers, yes, Ray Nagin is still very much alive. He is housed in the Allen Correctional Facilities. It's a federal prison located in Oakville, Louisiana. Oakville is located right between Lafayette and Lake Charles. It's in the central part of Louisiana. So that's where he is doing his time, his prison time. But yes, he did, right before that, because I remember after he left office, he got like another conversion, religious conversion, and he became so-called spiritual because a lot of the speeches and so on that he was giving, he started making a whole lot of biblical reference. So we always know that when black people tend to get themselves in trouble with white people, They always run to the church as their refuge, and they always get spiritual, and they always start talking this God nonsense. So, yeah, he started speaking in that biblical lingo. But with what the person was saying with the East, New Orleans East, and the flooding, and it was the floodplain that they were in, and they really and truly should not have been in that area, and with the white flight. So you can see once again, like the tipping point with most white people, that they would only going to allow so much black people to come into an area with them before they take off running again. They're not going to let their community get too overrun, even though y'all, like the woman said, they had the same income, were not criminal-minded, all want the same things for their families. But the whole idea was they did not want black people that close to them. They want to keep that distance, so they kept running. So I'm glad one of the sisters, the older Wall sister Cassandra, she said that she kept, she looked at the white man in the big antebellum house. She kind of looked at him with a bit of suspicion, and she never spoke to him that much, because after everyone had started running out, she started keeping her distance. And it's good that she kept up that guard, because to go back to what you were saying with black people and our tents, the further we get into this integration society that we think we are in with a race-neutral colorblindness, we tend not to want to see or to go back. We tend to think that racism has taken on a totally different form now, because what our parents went through, and they told us to in order to look out for certain things, like for danger signals, a lot of us are not aware of it. Our antennas have totally been out of whack. We don't recognize danger. We're more concerned with property more than with our lives. It's like with the sisters, with them, and the consumerism of buying things, I guess, to make ourselves feel good. But we're not that much concerned with safety. Because if this area is in a swamp zone, you cannot go against Mother Nature. Water is water. You can pump it out, but eventually that water is going to creep back in. It's going to take back over that area. And if you let these white people pump this water out, build subdivisions, and you can spend $500,000 to buy a home and live there, you got to be thinking in the back of your mind, eventually this stuff is going to come back in and it's going to take over. So this is just something that we need to keep in mind, as a lot of us, there are floodplain maps in every jurisdiction that you could pull up to see if where you're living, if it was once a lake or whatever was here, because white people are very devious. They like to play God. They have a God complex, and they would like to go and drain swamps, drain certain areas, and all of a sudden say, oh, it's okay, you can build a house here. Next thing you know, you start having sinking, your places, cracks in your foundation and all of that, because you're built on an area where you have no business building a house. I'm going to pause here, Gus, and just let the others get in and get their commentary.
Right on. If anybody who has not chimed in, if you have comments, excuse me, you should get your hand up. Don't wait till the last minute if you have something that you want to make sure you get in. A couple of quick things that I noted. Many people, the book that Douglas Brinkley, his book, The Great Deluge, he is a suspected race soldier. He gives Ray Nagin a lot of criticism for waiting until Sunday, the day before Katrina hit, to issue a mandatory evacuation, and saying that people had concerns about him doing this because there were concerns that enforcing it, people not wanting to arrest people who stayed, and he was saying that legally that's not what happens. Police don't go around and arrest people. At least that's what they say. If you choose not to leave, if there's a mandatory evacuation, the thing, and this is one of the things where I think it's important, the dynamics of power in a system of white supremacy. Okay, maybe he should have issued an evacuation earlier. This was the first evacuation, mandatory evacuation, in the history of New Orleans. It had never been done before. With my understanding in the system of white supremacy, I can totally understand a non-white person being hesitant about doing this and not knowing, am I going to get in trouble with white people for doing this? Me being the first black person to step in and say, okay, there's going to be a mandatory evacuation of a major U.S. city never been done before in the history, and it's coming from me, a black male. Like, I can totally understand being hesitant. And even there were white people. New Orleans is a huge tourist city. That's been pointed out. There were concerns about, this could be bad for business. You messing up our money here. So I definitely, it might have even been something where you did have to go have some conversations with some powerful white people about whether or not to do this. He said he had to go talk to his city attorney. And I'm sure some other white people. I don't know if the city attorney was white at that time or not, but at any rate, that's one thing. Some of the other things that stood out from that chapter, the consumerism that was noted. We heard some of that earlier. I think Mr. McDonald had one or two luxury vehicles that were mentioned earlier. Not being prepared, that was mentioned as well. How they were talking about just dumping poor people into New Orleans East. That is the exact same thing that Wendell Pierce just talked about on Bill Maher last Friday evening that they are doing in Pontchartrain Park. And he's been talking about this. He was on Democracy Now!, PBS, and saying that after Katrina, black people got together and they created Pontchartrain Park Community Development for housing, to create housing for black people. And he said that they have just been doing the same thing, stockpiling poor people in his area, Section 8 housing, which he said he had no problem with, having low-income housing for people. No problem. That's fine. He said the problem is that they are making it difficult for black people who do have resources, who just say, hey, I have money, but I want to purchase a house. They're making it difficult, if not impossible, where he's having to turn away black people who have funds and want to purchase in Pontchartrain Park. So just consistent standard operating procedure with regards to the practice of white terrorism. He mentioned when, I guess, the evolution of New Orleans East, when it was white and black people there, he mentioned briefly, the sentence was, it was a racial nirvana. And I just thought that is crazy. Like, just even the term. If I am understanding nirvana, this is supposed to be something pleasant. For me, pleasant would not be the presence of black people and white people together. Not my conclusion of what it means to be white. That is not what I envision at all. I envision justice, not being mistreated, and not being surrounded. I really do not want any white people around me at all, because I already know what they are devoted to, what that identity is all about. Next, got that on the spending. Let's see. Hurricane Betsy, glad we got that mentioned. Be prepared. Make sure I got. There was a section, since the consumerism did get brought up, just so that people aren't being judgmental, thought it was great when they were the folks who had evacuated, who were trying to figure out what was going on in New Orleans East. And they said Cassandra was ready to rumble, though she'd be showing up wearing high heels. That even if, a lot of us, we're all still learning and trying to do our best, a lot of us can still be working constructively against racism, white supremacy. Let's see. What else did I want to make sure I thought was important to get in? Racial nirvana, got that. And the bridge, I thought that was super important. I'm going to get this book about New Orleans. I think it's on my wish list, with a portion where he says it would have been unthinkable to build an elevated highway above St. Charles Avenue or Magazine Street, yet that's exactly what happened on the other side of town in the 1960s when the city fathers, whites, mapped the I-10 through the center of Treme, a white man's highway through the black man's bedroom, said one critic on the losing end of that fight. The interstate was built directly over Claiborne Avenue, the commercial center of black New Orleans. In its day, Claiborne was a handsome boulevard of large oak trees lined with businesses, most of them black owned. By the time of Katrina, it was a strip of vacant storefronts under a thick slab of elevated concrete thrumming with traffic. Lewis judged it as nothing short of murder. Excellent portion, hugely important, and that's the exact same thing that whites did post-Katrina, just on a larger scale, just showing the consistency with the way in which they operate. But I thought that was hugely important. I definitely want to check out that book, and that's why I say it should be terrorism. We should call it what it is. This is terrorism. He's murdered a community, and then they'll just come in and say, well, oh, you people you can't run things, and people will say that black people don't have businesses and don't have entrepreneurial spirit. That is not the case at all. We just have a system of terrorism where white people come in and deliberately sabotage any and all of our efforts to do constructive things. Did other folks have commentary, things that stood out? Oh, and definitely, and you can let me know if that does not make sense, if you don't think that's valid, in terms of me saying that I think that is, it's understandable. I can understand the logic of Ray Nagin being hesitant to order an evacuation, but feel free.
Yes, I just want to say, this is Susan, made some great points earlier. I believe that's 4-4.
Sarah.
And also to Mr. Firefighter, I remember we read a book, or not, you had a guest on earlier this year, and that same kind of thing happened where he's from in Miami, where they built the highway right through the black area. I believe it was Liberty City or something at the time. It was one of the guests you had on, and that's like I-95. Yeah, that was I-95, went straight through the black area. And I said, that must be a trend. We're going to put this highway somewhere. Let's put it right, where they live and displace them. So that's what I thought when you read that part. I was like, man, you had a guest on that said that about Miami.
Nathan Connolly. Nathan Connolly, A World More Concrete. That's the picture he has on the front of the book. Not only did they build the highway through this black area, they put a playground for black children under the highway after it was constructed, and said that they were doing that to help. Other folks have commentary?
Yes, Gus. I'm glad that you mentioned that part, and no, you weren't something crazy, because after the white flight left out of New Orleans East, and as you said, with the black people in the middle class, they deliberately started at 40% of the Section 8 low-income housing that they brought into New Orleans East to depress the community, brought in the Dollar General, all of these different bargain stores and the check cashing places, and all of the restaurants and high-priced stores. They just shut up and they just ran out of there because they deliberately did that to depress the value of those people the same way as they have consistently done. Because as you said, with I-95 that ran straight through the East Coast and cut through the backyards or the bedrooms of black people, you only have to go to places like Atlanta and all of the other places. They did the same thing. You have I-20 that dissects the city going east to the west. Then you have Interstate 75 and 85 that goes north and south. And then you have the perimeter, the 285 that loops around the perimeter. So you cut off Atlanta and have it tight in a tight little corner while the white people are all out in these outlying suburbs. They've consistently done that throughout our existence. And the interstate highways and railroad tracks is what white people have always done, within which to devalue us and to separate us from everything. Throwing a railroad track, throwing a garbage dump, bust the highway through, and hey, decimate the black people's economy.
The racist code word for it is eminent domain. And I think it's a global strategy that is utilized by white people in practicing racism, white supremacy. I can move a street or move into your property at my demand. I may let you have that piece of property, but you put it in your back pocket because I'm going to move my expressway through your area where you stay at. Essentially, the white people, under the system of racist white supremacy, they allow us to stay at certain places. So therefore, they have the power to remove you from that area if they deem it necessary in order to maintain the system of racist white supremacy.
Correct. The eminent domain features something because in every community, eminent domain, the city or the state, they have 3 feet from the curb. From the curb 3 feet inwards is considered no man's land. It's eminent domain. So where your property line is, where you might put up your fence and think, okay, this is my fence because the sidewalk and all of that belongs to the city. No, it's 3 feet from the curb inward is what the city considered eminent domain. So whenever they got a busted pipe or whatever, they could fight back and forth. Oh no, it's not a city property, it's yours, and all this other nonsense. They like to go back and forth. It's theirs because it's all considered theirs. But they're not going to do anything about it because the whole idea is that any time that they want to dump you and get rid of you, then they go in and they claim that eminent domain and they pull up that map and say, hey, this was always in the contract deed. This is ours. You need to go ahead and you need to move.
Yeah.
Yes. We're pretty much did our 3 hours. If folks did not get to comment, you can feel free to write. We have a ways to go before we're all done, but feel free to share if you have other comments. Oh, yeah, we've got like 20 chapters to go, so we'll be on this for a while for folks who are listening in to the archives. We'll be here tomorrow for the compensatory call-in, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, and then we'll be here Sunday morning. That is Sunday, September 20th at 12 noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. That's our early start. Shani will be here. We'll hear how her mom has been practicing racism, update on workplace racism, opportunity for folks who maybe can't participate during our normal broadcast time. Grand hearing from everyone. I hope it has been constructive. Getting information. As I said, I've been reading a lot, so I'm trying to share. I should be able to have really great contribution every week, as long as we're doing this book, because I have been reading lots of other material and researching this, so I should be able to add nice supplements the whole way that we go. One of those, this from The Deluge, the contrast in the way that they talk about white people and the way that they talk about black people. In terms of preparing for the storm, responding to the storm, just the whole way. This, I thought, was just massive illustration of that. So he writes, this is from The Great Deluge. It took others got too far down. Andrew Travers, a graduate student in history at Tulane, for example, spent his Saturday evening at Pat O'Brien's French Quarter Bar, downing Hurricanes, a potent rum fruit juice concoction created in the early 1940s by reckless revelers waiting out a ferocious tropical storm. According to New Orleans chef Emeril Lagasse, the best recipe for a hurricane was 2 ounces light rum, 2 ounces dark rum, 2 ounces grenadine, 1 ounce orange juice, 1 ounce sour mix, 1 teaspoon of sugar, and orange wedges for garnish. O'Brien's was packed that night. It was a giant hurricane party with cocktails being pounded by the rebels determined to booze and boogie their way through the natural disaster. In August 1969, a group of young people drank hurricanes at a beachside party in Pass Christian, Mississippi, daring Camille to make landfall. It did, and 20 of them drowned. When Travers sobered up the following morning, he looked at CNN on television and learned that Katrina seemed to be developing into a Category 5 storm. They were rehashing the doomsday scenario we've been talking about for years, Travers recalled. A direct hit and broken levees and an American Atlantis. He telephoned his girlfriend, who had stockpiled water and non-perishables in her apartment, and invited a handful of friends to stay through the storm. I will stop there. I heard lots of commentary and even like 10 years on of black people and why didn't they leave, and that's just ridiculous. And I have seen this in my life repeatedly. White people can engage in some of the most reckless, degenerate behavior, and they are not talked about and judged in the same way at all. Even when a group of them go out, and I could never imagine a group of black people just going out and hanging out at the beach. And I guess, but it's hard for me to fathom that one. At any rate, and that is another reason why I consistently say one of the worst combinations in the universe is white people and alcohol all the time. And while I also say sobriety would be best under conditions of white terrorism. This whole environment is saturated with this sort of nonsense where you have constant warfare being waged against black people. It is no time for parties, celebration, and not being able to think clearly. If you're going to be in the vehicle, buckle up, do everything we can to minimize contact with race soldiers. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll look forward to hearing from everyone tomorrow evening. With that, Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. C.O.W.S signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.